Chapter 1031. Soren's face was very ugly. He was surrounded by a cold, murderous aura, and Vivian and Lillian could not help but hold Soren's hand nervously. For a long time, Soren cared about the people around him very much. Although Lulu's status in Mordor was not high, she was one of the first people to enter the core circle. She was Vivian's partner and maid, and Soren had long recognized her as an important part. And such a core member and an underage girl was now secretly planted with a divine seed and became a tool for the resurrection of the gods. This was simply challenging Soren's bottom line. Soren suddenly had a few suspects in his mind. He turned to Vivian and said, "You go out first. I want to find out who planted the divine seed in Lulu." Vivian and Lillian went out obediently. Divine form. Then Soren's whole body was shrouded in golden light. He directly reached out and pressed on Lulu's forehead, and then his spirit invaded her mind in an instant. 3 divine powers appeared in front of Soren's eyes. The first one was from the Lady of Silvermoon. This was the power of divine blessing, and it was directly added to Lulu. The second one was from Vivian. This was the power of blessing. The little girl gave a trace of divinity to Lulu after getting the power of the divine title of fear, wanting to help her become a demigod. The third one was the most hidden, and it was wrapped around Lulu's soul. The problem was the third divine power. Lulu herself did not know about this divine power, and it was secretly planted at some time. Rather than a gift, it was more like a trick and a curse. Its function was to use Lulu's soul and body as nourishment for rebirth, when a certain existence died. The goddess of cat and dance. Soren gritted his teeth and said these words, and then his face became very ugly. To ensure her safety, he had even informed the goddess of love to bring her back. However, it seemed that the goddess of the Chaos faction did not appreciate his kindness at all. She had planted a divine seed in Lulu's body. She wanted to use Lulu as a resurrection tool in the future. First of all, Lulu was a very talented feline girl. Secondly, cats were very compatible with the goddess of dance's priesthood. Soren was sure that before she was taken away, she had secretly contacted Lulu and used some secret method to leave a seed in Lulu's body. This goddess probably had a secret plan, but looking at the situation of the seed being activated now, it was obvious that she had a plan. Something seemed to have happened to the cat and dance goddess. Serves you right. Soren smiled coldly as he sent his divine energy into Lulu's soul. You won't die if you don't ask for it. Something had actually happened to him after he was brought back by the goddess of love. Looks like even the heavens can't save you. This time, Soren's remaining friendliness towards the cat and dance goddess disappeared. He did not hesitate to transform into his divine form. First, he erased the divinity given by the Silvermoon Lady, then suppressed the divinity given by Vivian. Finally, he extracted Lulu's soul and carefully removed the seed of divinity. The cat and dance goddess's divine power level was much lower than Soren's, so removing the seed of divinity was not difficult. However, after thinking of something, Soren stopped and suppressed the seed of divinity instead. High Priest. Soren stopped all of this and turned his divine sense to the temple. Immediately send someone to find out about the goddess of love and the cat and dance goddess. Yes, my lord. The high priestess voice rang out. Soren let go of his hand and walked out of the door. Vivian and Lillian were waiting anxiously outside. When they saw him come out, they asked, "How is Lulu?" "She's fine for now." Soren nodded and said, "Maybe it's a blessing in disguise." Since the cat and dance goddess did not have a bottom line and dared to attack his people, they could not blame Soren for being merciless. If the cat and dance goddess were really dead, Soren would never resurrect her. Not only would he not resurrect the cat and dance goddess, he would also use the seed of divinity left by the cat and dance goddess and transfer her divinity to Lulu. This was something that was very likely to succeed. Under normal circumstances, the medium of a god's resurrection must have a special requirement. Many gods put the medium of resurrection on their chosen ones. Since Lulu was left with a seed of divinity, it meant that she could become the medium of a god's resurrection and inherit the divinity of the cat and dance goddess. In this way, Soren only needed to destroy the souls of the cat and dance goddess during the resurrection process, and then the divinity would be automatically transferred to Lulu. For Soren, who had the divinity of slaughter and death, this was at least 70% certain. Time passed little by little. In the afternoon, the high priest sent over a piece of information and a video. It was a land full of holes and it looked like it had been bombed by missiles. The high priest said calmly, "There is no news about the cat and dance goddess at the moment. But just yesterday the goddess of love and lady of night fought in the northwest wilderness. The two powerful goddesses flattened more than 10 mountains in the battle, and the shockwaves of their divinity turned everything within 10 kilometers into ruins. Sure enough, the cat and dance goddess was finally in trouble. This goddess had fallen into the trap of Lady of Night before and almost died. At that time she was pulled back by the goddess of love, but now it seemed that she could not hold back her desire to die, and finally something happened. She would not die if she did not seek death. Her chaotic nature seemed to make her like to try dangerous things, and now it seemed that she was about to die. The reason why she was not completely dead yet was that she had a backup plan. She still had her seed of divinity in Lulu. If Soren did not notice anything unusual, the goddess would soon occupy Lulu's body and soul, and eventually take over Lulu's memory and body without anyone knowing. Finally she would replace and lurk around Soren. Soren waved his hand and put away the video. He turned to Vivian and said, "Protect me. I want to completely eliminate Lulu's hidden dangers." Soren no longer had any sympathy for the cat and dance goddess. He went straight into the room and hugged Lulu's petite body in his arms, then sat down cross-legged and put Lulu on his knees. He then lowered his head and put his forehead on Lulu's forehead. Astral projection. A pale golden shadow of the soul emerged from Soren's body, and then turned into a stream of light and went into Lulu's body. The next moment, an empty spiritual space appeared, just like the battlefield that Soren had entered, where Vivian's soul was trapped. The Dreadlord also used a spiritual space to trap Vivian's soul, which caused the little girl to sleep for a long time. Now the cat and dance goddess used the same method, but the difference was that Soren saw the sleeping Lulu. Her spiritual energy was far inferior to Vivian's. "Who?" A female voice with a hint of horror sounded, and then a charming and tall figure appeared. The cat and dance goddess, Sharius. The goddess controlled the domain of charm and had a very charming face, but at the moment she was a little pale because she knew that all her plans had been exposed when she saw Soren. From the first time she saw Lulu, she noticed the amazing talent of this little cat girl. Because of the Avatar crisis, she secretly left a backup plan in Lulu. With the help of Lulu's innate closeness to her, she planted a seed of divine power in Lulu. The purpose was that if something happened to her in the future, she could use Lulu to be resurrected. As long as the Avatar crisis was over, even if her identity was exposed, Soren would not be able to do anything to her. "It's you." Soren's expression was cold. With a wave of his hand, a silver-white stream of light turned into a curved sword. He looked at Sharius in front of him and said in a deep voice, "Cat and dance goddess. You dare to attack my people. Aren't you being too audacious?" Shadow Lord. The cat and dance goddess, Sharius looked at Soren, who was approaching step by step. Her pretty face was very pale and she hurriedly said, Don't do it. I'm willing to surrender to you. Think about it. She's just an ordinary cat girl. He's just a mortal. As long as you are willing to help me resurrect, I'm willing to make a Styx oath to be loyal to you. I'm willing to surrender to you. I'm willing to give you everything I have. I can even become your servant. Isn't this more valuable than the cat girl in front of me? The cat and dance goddess, Sharius, was very clear about this. That was, she had absolutely no chance of winning against Soren. She was just a weak divine power, and Soren was an intermediate divine power. Soren's rise was from a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood, and he had already killed a lot of gods. And none of her divine titles were combat, so once she fought, she would be completely crushed. Sharius did not hesitate to put out her biggest bargaining chip. In her eyes, Lulu was just a mortal and she was a goddess. Whether it was value or beauty, she was far more valuable than the little cat girl in front of her. As long as Soren was a smart evil god, he should know which was more valuable, a goddess who surrendered to him or a mortal cat girl who was more valuable. Sharius tried her best to show her beauty and charm, and she also showed a pitiful look. She believed that no evil god would reject a beautiful goddess like her. But Soren faced this temptation that was full of benefits, and he just calmly said, I refuse. You have already crossed my bottom line. A cold light flashed. Along with the surging divine power, Soren's territory directly broke through the spiritual dimension, and at the same time, it turned into a golden light and slashed towards the soul of the cat and dance goddess in front of him. It was not like Soren had never played with a goddess before. If the cat and dance goddess thought that this could make Soren give up on Lulu and choose her, she was too naive. Chapter 1032. No. Along with the cat and dance goddess Sherry's screams of despair, Soren's divine power tore everything apart without hesitation. The difference between a minor divine power and a lesser divine power was about 3 times, and the difference between a lesser divine power and an intermediate divine power was also about 3 times. Soren's strength was close to that of a greater divine power, and he could even fight the goddess of love head-on. How could the cat and dance goddess Sherry's in front of him withstand Soren's divine power? A cold voice rang out, "Killed cat and dance goddess Sherry's. Extracting target's soul energy. You've received 150000 slaughter EXP. Target has divinity. Extracting target's divinity. You've received 8 divinity. Target has divinity. Extracting target's divinity. You've received 6 divinity. Target has the chaos, charm, kindness, travel and trickery domains. Trickery domain compatibility 85%. Extracting target's trickery domain. Your trickery domain has been upgraded." As the cat and dance goddess Sherry's soul completely dissipated, a wave of divine power also entered Soren's soul. However, this goddess was too weak. Moreover, she seemed to have been killed by the Lady of the Night, and Soren received very little divine power from her. Lulu meow. Soren turned around and looked at Lulu, who was gradually waking up. Her expression was a little confused, but her mind had recovered, and all her memories had been recalled. Sherry's controlled the charm domain, and with the help of the cat divine title, she had charmed Lulu's soul from the beginning, making her completely under her control. If not for Lulu's strong consciousness, she would have been devoured long ago. Master Meow. The little cat girl cleverly got up and rubbed against Soren's clothes to show her affection. Soren reached out and stroked Lulu's little head, then said, "Relax. Open your spiritual domain. I'll help you take over Sherry's divine title." Lulu Meow did a meditative action, but she didn't fully understand. She had absolute trust in Soren, especially after she recalled everything that had happened. Divine spark extraction. Soren stretched out his hand and grabbed at the air. The divine power that had dissipated when he killed the cat and the dancing goddess, Sherry's, instantly gathered. Then Soren said in a deep voice, "Be patient. Fuse with these energies. You can do it." Soren collected all the divinity from the goddess of dance, Sherry's. He then controlled the divinity and infused it into Lulu's body. The crafty approach had already been absorbed by Soren. However, as a god with weak divine power, Kara still had many other powers. Her clergy included cats, dance, hedonism, sensory enjoyment and large-scale joyful celebrations. Apart from crafty approach, Kara's domain also included chaos, charm, kindness and travel. Lulu Meow couldn't absorb all of the godhood, but she could fuse with some of it. A golden light appeared. The first power that Lulu Meow fused with was the clergy, cat. She was a cat girl herself, and her compatibility with this clergy was far better than anyone else. However, Lulu Meow's starting point was still too low. It seemed that except for the cat clergy, there was no way to accept the other clergies. Instead, they were transferred to other gods with similar clergy. Then came the power of the domain. Lulu Meow successfully fused the domain of charm and dance. At the same time, the sensory enjoyment was also fused. Then she absorbed a little power of large-scale joyful celebrations. Finally, there was a little bit of chaos and travel. At the same time, just as Soren finished all this, a golden light suddenly flew from the sky and fell directly into Lulu Meow's body. Divinity from the sky. This was the divine power that dissipated when the dancing goddess, Sherry's, died. Under the guidance of Soren, the most important, cat clergy was integrated into Lulu Meow's body. In the room, Soren quickly opened his eyes and Lulu Meow also woke up. "Brother? Brother." The 2 little girls appeared in the room and then Gloria came in. It was impossible for her not to notice such a big thing. "Lulu?" Vivian walked over and reached out to touch Lulu Meow's head. She turned around and said, "Brother, is she okay?" Soren smiled and nodded. "Yes. But we can call her Cat Maiden from now on." The dancing goddess, Sherry's, was known as the dancing goddess and the mother of cats. Lulu Meow inherited part of her clergy and power. Now she should be called Cat Maiden. Gloria gave Soren a look. So, Soren left Vivian and Lulu Meow behind and followed Gloria out. "Is she okay?" Gloria asked softly. Soren nodded and said, "I have erased Sherry's will. Now Lulu Meow has inherited the clergy of Cat. At the same time she has mastered the domain of charm and dance." Gloria heard this and sighed in relief. She then said, "So she has become a god? What a lucky little girl." Soren shook his head. Then he slowly said, "Lulu Miao is at most a demigod with a clergy. But it will be easy for her to become a god in the future. She has a close relationship with Vivian. In the future she will be Vivian's subordinate." No matter what, Vivian was an intermediate god. Gods of this level should have one or two subordinate gods. Lulu Miao was undoubtedly the most suitable. "Brother." After making sure Lulu Miao was okay, Vivian quickly came out. At this time, Soren also turned around and said seriously, "Vivian, Lulu Miao now has the clergy of Cat. You, as her master, have the responsibility and obligation to teach her how to become a god. From today on she's your subordinate god. You need to teach her how to be a true god." Fate really gave Lulu Miao a big gift. Soren had a hard time becoming a god, but Lulu Miao didn't expect to be a blessing in disguise. She directly became a demigod. Although this was thanks to Soren, it was also her own luck. If she wasn't a cat girl, Cherise would never pay attention to her. If she wasn't a servant of Vivian, Soren wouldn't care so much about her. For this reason, Soren even gave up Cherise's loyalty and chose to support Lulu Miao to become a new goddess. Now, there were already two demigod candidates in the whole city of Mordor. One was Saruman, and the other was Lulu Miao. In addition, Gloria gradually mastered the clergy of prophecy. Vivian and Lillian were mid-level gods, and Soren also controlled a maiden of pain. At present, everything he had was close to the scale of a god. At the same time, after Lulu Miao got the clergy of Cat, Soren also had some new ideas. Because in the belief of the earth in his previous life, black cats played a special role in the Egyptian god system. They were inextricably linked to the underworld and evil spirits. Soren controlled death and slaughter, and Vivian controlled fear and strife. These were all extensions of the death god system. Lulu Miao's existence could make up for part of it in the future. Inside a magnificent divine temple, a woman with fiery red hair and an unusually beautiful face was sitting on the throne of the temple. She opened her eyes as if she sensed something and looked at the sky. A dim star was falling. Sigh. The fiery-haired lady let out a soft sigh and then murmured, "Is this your final outcome?" The goddess of love also felt very helpless because this god was too difficult to control. She was not as obedient as the goddess of joy. Most of the time her orders did not work at all. She had already fallen into the hands of the Lady of Night, but after bringing her back from Mordor, Sharius still could not control her nature. If a god was controlled by nature, then they had lost their essence. Lady of Fire. With a golden light, the figure of the goddess of joy appeared. She sighed and said, "It seems that Sharius has completely fallen. Are we going to take revenge on the Lady of Night?" The goddess of love shook her head slowly. Then she whispered, "I can feel that the Lady of Night is weaving some conspiracy. She and the Queen of Spiders have joined forces. We can't act rashly. Let's wait for the Lady of Silvermoon to prepare everything. Mystra should be recovering soon. When the goddess of magic fully recovers, it will be time for us to take revenge for her." No matter what, Sharius was her god, and the Lady of Night had to pay the price for her repeated schemes. Otherwise, the other gods would completely despise her and think that the goddess of love was just a useless vase. Killing a god was a very serious provocation to the main gods. The plague was still spreading and the power of death was getting stronger and stronger. Everything brewing in the material plane seemed to be accumulating, waiting for the moment to completely explode. P.S. Volume 9 ends here. Tomorrow will be Volume 10. The last wave of the undead disaster will also begin. The gods will once again compete for the ownership of the god of death, and any winner will directly be promoted to a greater divine power. Naruto, who has been plotting for a long time, Clemvox, who has disappeared, the goddess of death and magic from another world, the god of murder who broke through the seal, the god of lich who is barely alive, the lord of the undead in the abyss, and the lord of the undead in the lower planes. Everyone who is qualified to compete for the god of death is preparing. Soren, who has the power of death and slaughter, is also waiting for an opportunity. Chapter 1033. Am I going to die? The bonfire could not dispel the chill in his body. Zoe held his brother tightly in his arms. Hunger had made him lose most of his physical strength, but at this moment he still held his 10-year-old brother tightly under his body, closed his eyes and waited for the pain of being bitten. Maybe death is relief, Zoe thought. He could feel his young brother shivering. He tried to comfort his brother, but he did not know what to say. He could only murmur, "I'll see my father and mother soon." The expected pain did not come. There was a scream in the darkness, followed by the sound of something falling to the ground. A slender figure appeared in the darkness. He frowned and glanced at the ghoul in front of him, who had been killed by an arrow. Then he glanced at Zoe and said, "Captain, there are 2 living people here." They were saved. Zoe opened his eyes in surprise. There was still a trace of despair and ecstasy on his face. He turned around and saw a dead body. It was an extremely ugly ghoul who used to be his companion. His name was Zinov from Southwind County, and he used to be a coachman. The ghoul's limbs were very slender and the skin on his head was sunken. It seemed that he had been in a state of hunger for a long time. The only special feature was his stomach. This ghoul's stomach was bulging high, as if a stone had been stuffed into it. This feature also appeared on Zoe and his young brother. Without exception, their stomachs were a little bulging because they did not store food in their stomachs, but bark, grass roots, leather, and even some kind of soft soil. These foods, which were extremely difficult to digest, could temporarily resist hunger, but could not supplement the nutrients they needed. Their former companions fell one after another. Many people, including his father and mother, had become ghouls because of hunger and torture when they were alive. They were refugees living in the wilderness. They heard that the south coast was rich and stable, and hoped to cross the wilderness to reach the Wind Spear Hills. Here. The young rogue threw a small package over, but his eyes were still vigilant. "Eat something first." There was food. Zoe's eyes lit up as he rushed over. He took out the black bread and took a bite. The familiar taste made him cry. He hadn't eaten real food for a long time. As if thinking of something, he quickly broke off a small piece of bread, put it in his mouth and chewed a few times. Then he took it out and put it in front of his weak brother and whispered, "Joey, there was food. Bread, hurry up and eat some. You'll have more strength." Water. The rogue's eyes softened a little when he saw Soren's action, and then he threw a kettle over. In the wastelands, he had seen many refugees who had completely lost their humanity and reason. The young man in front of him was much better than most he had seen. "Are there any survivors?" A middle-aged man with a cold expression appeared, followed by 2 shining soldiers. The middle-aged man glanced at Zoe and asked, "Have you checked her?" The young rogue shook his head. The middle-aged man glanced at them and said in a deep voice, "Prepare some food for them." Then he would take it to the temple and hand it over to the priest. "The whole area has been infected by the plague." After that, he whispered to the person next to him, "Send them away now. Be careful that they become ghouls on the way." Zoe regained a lot of strength after eating. He looked up at the man in front of him in awe. Suddenly, he seemed to recognize something and said in surprise, Are you from Mordor City?" The middle-aged man nodded, but he did not pay attention to the young man. He still had a lot to do. The nearby water sources were polluted. Many starving refugees only needed a little bit of death power to turn into ghouls. Some of the first batches of people he received became ghouls on the way. Not only did they kill many refugees, but even 3 of his men were killed. These were all good men from Mordor City. The middle-aged man's face was full of pain at the thought of this. The strength of the guards in the Wind Spear Hill was too weak. He brought 12 people from Mordor City. He did not expect that a mistake would kill a quarter of them. Those damn ghouls. The young rogue saw that Zoe had recovered a little and came over. He said in a deep voice, "How many people do you have left?" Zoe thought for a moment and said, "Some fell behind. We encountered a group of goblins on the way. Some have become man-eating monsters. I don't know. There were more than 100 people when we set off. Now only the 2 of us are still alive." The young rogue was silent. At this time, Zoe noticed that the other party had pointed ears. This was a half-elf rogue. "Come with me." The rogue did not seem to be interested in talking. He said in a deep voice, "I will take you to a safe place first." The food gave Zoe some strength, and his words filled Zoe with hope. Zoe helped her younger brother up and staggered after him. Along the way, although the rogue in front of them was leading the way, he kept a distance from them, and there was a trace of vigilance in his eyes. Zoe did not know why, but he could guess that maybe he was afraid that he would suddenly become one of those man-eating monsters. Zoe had seen many of those man-eating monsters. They were called ghouls. Including Zoe's parents, they also became these monsters after death. He still remembered the scene at that time. If the adventurer in the team had not killed it, his parents would have bitten him and his brother to death. Hunger tortured their souls and wills, and when death came, many people became undead. "Captain." A tall woman came out of the night. She said to the middle-aged man in front of her, "There are no living people in front of us. The rest have all become ghouls, and those who have not become ghouls have also been eaten." The middle-aged man's eyes were calm and he said in a deep voice, "Get ready to clean up. This is an important route to the Wind Spear Hills. We can't let ghouls occupy this place. Inform the Dark Blade Guards to prepare for action. The order given by Mordor City is to clean it up within 3 days." "Yes." The woman bowed and disappeared into the night. The wind was howling. The middle-aged man shook his head and sighed. He murmured, "I have been staying in Mordor City, and I don't feel anything about the outside world. I didn't expect that the once rich South has become a hell on earth." On the way they passed through several villages and towns, which were all gnawed bones. Get ready to move. There was no point in sighing. Their mission could not be delayed for too long. Zoe was in a daze all the way. He didn't know how long he had been walking and stopping. In the end, his whole consciousness was blurred. When he recovered, the first thing he saw was a middle-aged priest in a white robe. The priest smiled at him gently and then said to the rogue next to him, "It's okay now. The plague has been dispelled. Take him back for a comprehensive disinfection, and then send him to the resettlement camp." Zoe turned his head and saw his sleeping brother. Then fatigue hit him and he fell into a deep sleep again. In a daze, he felt as if he was transported to a carriage, and then he was half awake in the bumpy ride. When he fully recovered, he had come to a hut that stretched for more than 10 miles. "Birthplace? How old are you? What relatives do you have?" The man who looked like an official with a cold expression asked him a few words, and then handed him and his brother to a group of soldiers. There seemed to be a lot of people like them. Thousands of people were escorted forward. Some looked confused and some were full of hope. They walked like this for the whole morning until a green field appeared in front of them. Wheat field. Zoe opened his mouth in surprise. It was winter and there shouldn't be wheat fields. Even winter wheat should have just been sown. There was a burst of exclamations. But soon they were urged forward by the soldiers. They had escorted many people, and every time there was a burst of exclamations, and they had long been tired of it. "Look at those people. Those people are droll." Next to Zoe, a small man whispered, "Legend has it that they have the power to make the earth grow again." Some droll appeared near the wheat field and there were many farmers busy nearby. They occasionally looked up and then lowered their heads to work. The temperature nearby seemed to have begun to rise. After passing through the fortress, Zoe felt much warmer. At noon, Zoe and others arrived at their destination, which was a medium-sized town. They were placed in the south. Those with special skills were selected, and those without special skills were gathered near the farmhouse. That night, Zoe slept on the soft bed covered with hay. After a day of walking, Joey was sleepy, but he could still hear the faint sound of sobbing. He got up and walked to the window to look at the dark night sky, murmuring to himself. He didn't know what the future would be like. But now they were safe. His father and mother had passed away, but there was still a young brother alive. No matter what the future was, he could only persevere. The disaster had taken away too much from him, but hope also gave him the motivation to continue living. City Hall. A clerk-like man walked in quickly, and then said to Adele Isabella in her seat, "My lady, the 6th batch of refugees has been counted. The current population received is close to 200,000 people. Among them 80,000 people have been settled in the southern towns, and now it is close to saturation. I'm afraid the rest of the population will have to be settled in the east and west." Adele Isabella raised her head and said softly, "Got it. How is the harvest of crops?" The clerk took out a book and looked at it and quickly replied, "With the help of the Church of Agriculture, 1/3 of the land has been sowed. Droll has made some crops grow ahead of time, and the first batch of food is expected to be harvested next month. At present, according to the supply of Mordor City and the assistance of the Church of Agriculture, it can last for about half a year." Now, all the refugees in the south were gathering towards the Wind Spear Hills. Because Mordor City was far away in the outer islands, it was the least disturbed. Now it had become the biggest backer of the Wind Spear Hills. Whether it was materials or personnel, they could not do without the help of Mordor City. "Send this document to Mordor City." Adele Isabella picked up a document and handed it to the attendant next to her, and then said, "You can inform the temple to arrange for action." Population was faith. Most of the refugees in the Wind Spear Hills had been through a lot, and the gods they once believed in had become very weak. At this time, with a little guidance, Soren, who provided them with a new life, could harvest a large number of believers. New Moon Year 1677, early November. Just when the 7th batch of refugees was settled in the Wind Spear Hills, Soren, who was far away in Mordor City, suddenly seemed to have sensed something, and then he returned to his temple in an instant. A golden beam of light rose. With the automatic echoes of prayers around the temple, a huge amount of faith power gathered towards Soren's body. At the same time, this power also triggered the law energy that existed in the multiverse. In an instant, a new domain ability was mastered by Soren. A row of data appeared in front of him. Ability upgrade. Faith conversion. You have recast a new order for the South Coast. During the chaotic period of the Avatar crisis, you have created the law of Mordor City, and you have re-established order in the chaotic South Coast. You have obtained some information about the order domain. Divinity conversion. You have obtained a new ability, the order domain. From now on, some believers in the order camp will be able to access your order domain and obtain new abilities. Divinity fell from the sky. A little golden light merged into Soren's body, bringing him 5 points of divinity and 5 points of divinity. At the same time, the faith power that shrouded the temple was quickly consumed and turned into a new domain ability that was mastered by Soren. The order in Mordor City did not bring about a real change, but when Soren brought the order to the South Coast, the quantitative change finally led to a qualitative change. Soren mastered the order domain that other gods could only obtain after hundreds of years. And to obtain this powerful domain, it would either take hundreds of years to obey the order, or it could only reshape the order in turmoil. Chapter 1034. The Emerald Forest. A fairyland surrounded by clouds and mist. It seemed to be isolated from the chaotic world. Even the disaster of the Avatar crisis did not affect this land because it was located in the depths of the Elven Kingdom and belonged to a group of very powerful creatures. They were the dragons. And they were the most powerful golden dragons among the metal dragons. Golden dragons liked to live near warm mountains. They maintained a friendly relationship with the elves. As they grew older, golden dragons would gradually turn from dark yellow to golden, and eventually the color of their pupils would become lighter and lighter. At this moment in the dragon's nest in this mountain, a golden dragon whose pupils had turned pure gold like melted gold was entrenched here. It was an old golden dragon that had lived in this mountain for thousands of years. It was a little different from other dragons. Golden dragons would slowly grow beards over time. The golden dragon in front of them had a beautiful golden beard, and it looked like a learned sage. Golden dragons were favored by luck. When a golden dragon was old enough, they would understand a trace of the power of luck. They could give themselves and nearby allies a bonus of luck through the gems embedded in their bodies. The golden dragon in front of them had many colorful gems embedded in its dragon scales. They were all masters of magic and were far better at magic than other dragons. Golden dragons were the favorite of the dragon god among the metal dragons. They were also the only ones among the metal dragons that could fight against red dragons head-on. Silver dragons were much weaker in this regard. Dracolic. At this moment, the old golden dragon in front of them had a dignified expression. He said to a beautiful woman in front of him, "Is someone trying to resurrect the Dracolic again? Who is it? Dragon cultists. The god of liches? Is he also the mastermind behind this?" Standing in front of the old golden dragon was Alexandrina, the silver dragon that Soren saved. She perfectly completed the task that Soren asked her to deliver the news of the Dracolic's appearance. The dragons hated the Dracolic very much. This hatred was beyond their attributes. When a metal dragon and a 5-colored dragon encountered a Dracolic at the same time, they would most likely work together to send the Dracolic to the dragon's tomb. The dragon god also hated the Dracolic very much because this undead dragon had betrayed their faith. It was a form that the dragon god hated very much. "I see." The old golden dragon pondered for a moment and said slowly, "I'll send the news back to Dragon Island now. If the Lich God also interferes in this matter, it's not something we can deal with by ourselves. This matter must be reported to Lord Dragon God." The god of Lich himself held the divine title of Lich. If he were to resurrect the Dracolic, the chances of success would be very high. 1 or 2 gold and silver dragons were not enough to fight against the Dracolic, but because of the Avatar crisis, all the gods had fallen to the mortal world, and the dragon gods had also fallen to the material plane. However, they did not go to the mainland. Instead, they went to another place, Dragon Island. As mentioned earlier, many planes were attached to half-planes. Just like how the moon orbited the earth, there were also half-planes attached to the material plane. There were even gods who had grafted their divine kingdoms onto the material plane. Dragon Island was such a special place. It was the habitat of the dragons, a space that was closed and outsiders were not allowed to enter. Its entrance was at the farthest end of the sea, and only a few people were lucky enough to enter it. It was an island country surrounded by the sea, and it was also a large half-plane attached to the dragons. Similarly, there was another larger country, and that was the legendary Dragon Country. This was a world that was difficult for mortals to reach, and it was also a shelter built by the dragon god for the dragons. The pentashade dragons, metal dragons, and gem dragons could all be found in the Dragon Country. The dragon god was on Dragon Island. He was very smart to avoid the struggle of the gods. As a dragon, he did not need the faith of other races. Even the dragon itself needed very little faith, so the dragon god did not need to be involved in the battle of the Avatar crisis. The Order of the South Coast brought Soren a new domain power. This was a powerful force, and at the same time, it also gave Soren an additional ability, which was to endow the land and the plane with the Order attribute. If Soren wanted, he could also turn a land in the bottomless abyss into an evil one. Of course, this would consume a lot of divine power. Soren was not yet ready to fight against the bottomless abyss. He still needed to quietly accumulate power. However, while Soren was constantly stealing souls in the river Styx, good news from the Sigil City was also sent back. The Fallen which had obtained the nucleus of the Mies. However, at the same time the other party also made a very serious request. This request was made to Soren, but because the gods could not enter the Sigil City, the news was passed to Soren by the High Priest. These survivors of the Arcane Empire hoped to get the support of Soren. The destruction of the Arcane Empire was inseparable from the gods. One of these survivors of the Arcane Empire defeated another revenge party, and they thought that they should draw a powerful god as their backing and restore the glory of the Arcane Empire. Soren was their target. He was a newly ascended and powerful deity who was also curious and fond of arcane magic. Moreover, his woman was a witch. Note: these survivors of the Arcane Empire mistakenly believed that the Fallen Witch was Soren's intimate partner. The Fallen Witch did not deny this and used this to prove her worth. The Arcane Empire? Soren stood at the top of the tower and pondered. He said to himself, "It's absolutely impossible to restore the original Arcane Empire. I can't go to war with the gods for the nucleus of the Mies. And the Arcane Empire used too much energy in the past. If it wasn't for the self-sacrifice of the Oak Father, I'm afraid that the material plane would have been destroyed. The Arcane Empire civilization can be learned from, but it was too extreme in many aspects. Civilization must be controlled by power. It's good to use it for the people's lives, but if it's arrogant enough to challenge the gods, it must be completely destroyed. If it wasn't for the research of the neutron star golem, the Arcane Empire would not have been destroyed so quickly. This kind of golem that could threaten the gods' kingdom was not tolerated by the gods. After all, Soren had learned some secrets after being a god for so long. In order to break free from the shackles of the Fate Tablet, the gods once conspired together to fight against a very powerful existence, and Jurgil was one of them. This matter was related to the retirement of some ancient gods. Then, the Arcane Empire completely broke with the gods for some reason, and finally led to the sudden collapse of the Arcane Empire. As a god, Soren had to protect the power of the gods. He had the ambition to be above the gods, but he would never think that it was a good thing for the mortals to dare to challenge the gods. If he had been a god in that era, he would probably have stood on the side of the gods to destroy the Arcane Empire. The gods maintained the order of the multiverse. Although the civilization of the Arcane Empire was powerful, once it was out of control, it would bring terrible destruction. History had proved that the gods had maintained the normal development of the multiverse for hundreds of millions of years. Whether it was the arrival of the first demons or the emergence of the psychic monster empire, the gods had balanced everything in the multiverse, and many of them had died in battle. Although they had great power, the gods also fulfilled the obligations brought by their priesthood. More importantly, unless the Avatar crisis broke out, the gods rarely intervened in the material plane. I can help them. Soren pondered for a long time and slowly said, but only to restore the civilization, not to challenge the gods. There is no second father of the oak in this world. If that kind of disaster happens again, the world will completely wither. And I will also face the judgment of the gods. Let them hand over the nucleus of the Mies, and I will secretly help them rebuild the arcane civilization, but they must also remember not to cross the boundary of the gods. The entire arcane civilization was born with the help of the magic net. The magic net was under the control of the goddess of magic. A civilization that relied on the magic net and was born with the power of a powerful goddess was indeed crazy to try to challenge the most ancient gods. Rebuilding the civilization was a long process. Even with the remnants of the arcane empire, the huge resources needed to build a floating space city would take decades or even hundreds of years. Soren needed this time. As long as the Avatar crisis was over, other things could be dealt with later. Even as a god, Soren spent a lot of money to build a floating space city. The Arcane Empire had more than 10 floating space cities in its heyday, which was the accumulation of thousands of years of civilization. Even with the help of Soren, it was difficult for them to build a floating space city in decades. As for challenging the Divine Kingdom, even a weak divine power would need 2 or 3 floating space cities. Civilization was a good thing for all races. But the ambition to challenge the gods was not a good thing. If Soren found the signs, he would not hesitate to extinguish it. Yes, my lord. The voice of the high priest came. Since Soren had agreed. Then the fallen which could promise the remnants of the Arcane Empire. The core of the Mies was the key to building a floating space city. They only had the last one in their hands and it was very difficult to make a new one after handing it over. Because these cores of the Mies were created by wizards with a level of 35 and above. At present, there was no such powerful arcanist among them. Maybe these people could build a floating space tower, but to build a floating space city, there had to be 1 or 2 arcanists above level 35. The important reason why the Arcane Empire dared to challenge the gods was that there were many wizards above level 35 and legendary figures above level 40 at that time. Unfortunately, these powerful spellcasters eventually disappeared. For Soren, as long as he got the core of the Mies, it was only a matter of time before the Mordor city rose. Chapter 1035. After receiving Soren's promise, the sigil was very fast. The Fallen Witch, as Soren's intimate partner, quickly gained the trust of the arcane survivors, and brought the Mies's core back to the material plane. However, the survivors of the Arcane Empire also asked Soren to find them a quiet land in the material plane, where they could temporarily avoid the eyes of the gods. Until now, many gods were hostile to the survivors of the Arcane Empire, especially the Droll of the Nature sect. Fortunately, Soren had a lot of land, and it was impossible for him to give them a piece of land in the Outer Islands. However, there was a piece of land in the Far East that was discovered by the pirates under his command. The area of the land was not small, and it was also the result of their own actions. Soren was going to let them go to the land with strong radiation to see what they had done. If not for Soren's protection, these people would have to hide in the sigil until they died of old age. Only the sigil city, where the gods could not enter, could protect the survivors of the Arcane Empire from being hunted down by the Droll. The self-sacrifice of the oak tree's father made many powerful Droll angry and hateful towards them. After getting the Mies's core, Gloria left to prepare a large-scale teleportation circle, and Soren also used the power of the divinity to space change to prepare for it. About a day later, a portal was opened in the shadow plane, and then Soren used the power of the divinity to send a huge crystal ball over the Mies's core. Soren felt that the space was instantly filled with energy and murmured, "It's worthy of being called a divine artifact since the age of thorium." The Mies's core was a huge magic device. It looked like a crystal ball, but it was 150 feet in diameter. The ball emitted a very bright light as dazzling as the sun, and there were some slightly dark shadows on the surface. Below it was a gorgeous pedestal that held the perfect spherical device. Its function was to extract the raw energy of the magic network and transfer it to the crystal ball as the center. It could automatically supply energy to quasi-magic items, and at the same time, it allowed arcanists to create quasi-magic items without having to consume constitution points, soul energy, or cast permanents. Simply put, within the range of the Mies's energy core, the requirements to create all magical items were greatly reduced, and the success rate was astonishingly high. This was a very abnormal ability. This was also the reason why the Arcane Empire was able to achieve mana, and at the same time, many magic tools could be popularized among the commoners. Elemental fission only provided the basic energy source, but the Mies core could increase the chances of all spellcasters within the territory to create magic items, and at the same time, reduce the cost of creating magic items. During the era of the Arcanum Empire, every floating city required at least one Mies energy core, which was an important component that allowed the city to float. However, The power of the Mies core also had a limitation, and that was that it could only be used within a range of 1 to 3 kilometers. If the diameter of a territory exceeded this area, more than one Mies core would be required. This was because there would be a core area in the floating city, and only wizards who were powerful enough could live near it and enjoy the power of the Mies core. If the power of the Mies core went beyond this area, the effect would quickly weaken, and it would only be able to maintain the basic energy supply, just like a natural nuclear power plant. As a powerful artifact, the Mies core itself was a very dangerous thing. Touching the Mies core was a fatal act, and any mortal who touched the device would be killed instantly, regardless of the test of immunity. Any object, even magic items, that touched the Mies core, except for the pedestal, would be instantly disintegrated, and any undead creatures that touched the Mies core would be destroyed immediately. Mortals could not touch the Mies core or they would be destroyed instantly. This was because the Mies core contained a terrifying amount of energy. Is this the legendary artifact, the Mies core? Alice looked at the crystal ball in front of her with a fascinated expression and murmured, "What a terrifying amount of energy. I can feel the surging magic energy nearby." Soren nodded and said, "Yes. This is the Mies core, the legendary artifact that can extract the power of the magic network." Whether it was the Age of Thorium or the Arcane Empire, the creation of a Mies core required a large number of spellcasters with a profession level of 30 and above, and these spellcasters had to pay a price in the process of creating the Mies core. There were no records of the Age of Thorium. However, in the thousands of years of the Arcane Empire, there were less than 20 Mies cores created. Even with the power of the entire arcane civilization, there were only so many Mies cores created in the span of 1,000 years. One could imagine how precious the Mies core was. "We can start now." Gloria's expression was a little excited, and she said to Soren excitedly, "Get ready to send the Mies core into the arcane tower." Soren nodded. Divine form. Reality change. Space change. The only one among these people who could remove the Mies core was Soren, and he had to be in his divine form. He turned into a golden giant hundreds of meters tall, held the Mies core in the void, and then sent it into the arcane tower with the power of divinity. The next moment, powerful energy burst out directly, and all the magic crystals around all lit up. The magic lock that enveloped the space seemed to be fully charged all of a sudden, and it automatically activated to cover a range of 20 kilometers. At the same time, it also activated the energy barrier. But this was only the most basic. The real power of the Mies core was that in addition to the huge amount of energy, it could also connect to the magic network and activate the anti-magic field. "You can get ready now." Soren gasped and turned into the holy form, then said to Gloria, "Get ready to start the test." Gloria nodded with a serious expression. The next moment she appeared directly at the top of the arcane tower. She clenched the scepter of Savras and tapped it gently. Then an invisible wave of energy spread toward the city of Moder. There was a burst of exclamation. Within the range of Moder, all the wizards under Gloria's command and other wizards from other places were instantly disconnected from all the magic connections. They instantly found that their casting ability had all disappeared. Not all of them had disappeared. Some wizards above level 15 still retained their spellcasting ability, but they were still affected by the interference. They looked at the sky in surprise, not knowing what happened at this moment. Fortunately, the activation time of the anti-magic field was very short, and they soon regained the ability to cast spells. It worked. Gloria walked down with a smile on her face and nodded, "The anti-magic field has been activated." Within the range of the anti-magic field, the casting ability of middle-grade wizards will be completely sealed. Next step. It's time to prepare the casting license. In order to prevent the abuse of magic energy, especially in a special place like the floating city, Soren must prohibit other wizards from causing damage. The anti-magic field was not only used for fighting, but also to ensure the safety of the floating city. Chapter 1036. Black Key Valley. The raging fire ignited the valley, and the screams of humans could be heard from time to time. An elegant silver dragon hovered in the sky, and next to it was a gold dragon and a copper dragon. At this moment there were many corpses in the valley. Most of them were members of the dragon cult and some of them were elves. In order to help the dragons destroy the Dracolic, the nearby forest rangers corresponded to the Covenant. At the same time, the goddess of the forest, Marikai, seemed to be disgusted by the existence of the Dracolic and gave some help. However, the battle was not a one-sided situation. Among the members of the dragon cult below, there was a wizard wearing a purple robe, which was the symbol of a top member. Half of them were legendary mages and liches. A dead black dragon turned into a dracolic had fallen in the valley. Under the siege of 3 adult dragons, the newly resurrected dracolic could not hold on for long. The dragons besieged the purple-robed wizard, while the other rangers waited for an opportunity to move. In the shadows, a tall and graceful figure slowly walked onto the battlefield. No one seemed to have noticed her arrival. She walked up to one of the dead high-ranking members of the Dragon Witch cult and waved her hand, extracting a soul from the corpse. "Finally found you." Verges, the goddess of magic and death, showed a satisfied smile and murmured, "God of liches. Let's see where you can run this time." As a god from another world, Verges, the goddess of magic and death, had the ability to understand death. She used the power of magic to extract the soul and interpret it. For so long she had been tracking the traces of the god of liches. This was a cunning god. Although she was not powerful, she knew how to protect herself. The battle in the valley was about to end. Verges, the goddess of magic and death, did not intend to disturb them. She just came quietly and left quietly. But just before she disappeared, a ranger with the emblem of the goddess of the forest, Marikai, frowned and looked in the direction she left. The gods were not ignorant. In order to protect themselves, many gods quietly created some chosen ones. Wind Spear Hills. In a forest surrounded by mountains, the elite guards from the city of Motor were moving forward quickly. They approached under the cover of night until a hidden camp appeared in front of them. There were many undead in the vicinity, but they were all quietly taken care of by the rogues. Adele Isabella had also joined the battle. As a legendary class player, she had been blessed by Soren and gained special abilities that were no weaker than legendary class players. Target found. A cold male voice rang out. Target confirmed to be a high-ranking member of the Dragon Shaman cult. A revived undead dragon has been discovered south of the camp. There was a red dragon entrenched in the Wind Spear Hills. In the past there had been red dragons that were older than old age. The members of the Dragon Witch cult had captured a red dragon and found the skeleton of a huge dragon. In order to revive as many dracolics as possible, they would even transform white dragons. However, the success rate of the transformation was relatively low. Most of them would become low-level bone dragons. Dark Blade, prepare to move. Interrogate and assassinate those sorcerers. The High Priest commanded the operation this time, and Soren's figure also appeared in the rear, but he did not mean to make a move. The battle soon broke out. The elite rogues quietly sneaked in and assassinated the sentries outside. When the first batch of members of the Dragon Witch cult was assassinated, they finally reacted and alerted everyone in the camp. However, it was a little too late now. A large number of rogues quickly rushed into the camp. Unlike the other rogues, almost all of the rogues who served Soren had the potential to become battle thieves. At the same time, a group of elite arcane assassins cooperated with them. The giant's burly body was buffed by multiple divine spells. With a dull roar, the figure of the Dracolix rose into the air, but as soon as it flew up, it stiffened in the air. The figure of the divine priest Milan appeared, and with the help of many priests she cast more than 10 divine spells. Compared to the past, the divine priest Milan had grown a lot. This little girl quickly matured and worked hard to take over the position of the high priest in the future. The second batch of successors trained by Soren had begun to step onto the stage. In the future, the high priest would follow him into the kingdom of God, and the divine priest Milan would take over the scepter of the church. It's almost over. Soren quietly watched the battle in front of him. When the enemies were almost wiped out, his figure also appeared on the battlefield. Divinity of Death. Soul Extraction. Soren waved his hand and pulled out a gray soul. After a little inspection, he could not help but say, "What a surprise." Originally, he was going to check how many members of the Dragon Witch cult were in the Windspear Hills so that he could kill them all in one go. However, he did not expect that Soren would accidentally find the trace of the god of Lich. This god was not very strong, but his whereabouts had always been very mysterious. For Soren, the god of Lich also had a trace of the divine power of death. Interesting. Soren smiled and crushed the soul in front of him, then teleported back to the castle. "My lord." About a quarter of an hour later, the figure of a rogue appeared outside the door. He knelt down on one knee and said, "The territory of the gnomes seems to have been breached by the undead. We found traces of Siric's followers." "Siric?" Soren frowned and murmured, "It seems that some things have been changed by me." Sirik actually made a move on the gnome gods. He thought carefully and decided to put off the matter of Sirik first. The god of Lich was currently in the southern part of the continent, and he was secretly colluding with Szasztan. Soren was going to kill him. If he could kill the god of Lich, Soren could not only replenish the power of the divinity of death, but also obtain some special abilities and secret spells. After all, the fall of the god of mages was related to this guy. However, to be on the safe side, Soren still decided to let Gloria and Vivian go together. The god of Lich was not easy to die, and Soren wanted to make sure that they could completely destroy his phylactery. Gloria had become a demigod, and it was time to try actual combat with a god. In addition, at present, the Fallen Witch had returned to the city of Moder, and there was no problem with her in charge. Soren just wanted to let her study how to solve the plague spread by the undead. After all, she had obtained a little divinity of the goddess of plagues at that time. Chapter 1037. Beifong County. It was close to the northern tower, but it was not the territory of the witches. It belonged to the church that served the Lady of Night. The Church of the Gods had many private lands in the material plane. After the end of the era of Queen Isabella, there were no more powerful empires in the material plane, and the church took the opportunity to gain some secular power. However, under the constraints of the gods, the church did not dare to steal too much power. They only controlled the range of a city, just like the harvest city controlled by the Church of the Goddess of Agriculture. Soren also dealt with it the same way. His church had great influence in Mordor City, but he did not have much secular power. Beifong County was controlled by the church under the command of Lady of Night, but there was still a puppet baron nobleman on the surface. This noble himself was a believer of Lady of Night. This was a common method used by the gods to support the nobles who believed in them to become lords, to achieve the effect of secretly controlling and influencing them. At this time, near a cemetery in Beifong County, a group of floating ghost fire was wandering. This was a very common phenomenon, because after Death God Nero's scheme succeeded, the number of will-o'-the-wisps and ghosts increased exponentially. Now, the nobles did not dare to bury their corpses near their original graves, and many large-scale graveyards were dangerous even during the day. This ghost fire seemed to be irregular, but if one looked carefully, they could find that they were controlled by some kind of power to monitor the surroundings. Near a large mausoleum in the south of the cemetery, a secret door suddenly opened, and then a lich came out. He carefully observed the surroundings, and then cast a teleportation spell to leave. Below the mausoleum, it was a very wide underground tomb. It was originally the tomb of an earl, but it was later transformed into an underground stronghold by the lich. The passages in all directions were more than 10 kilometers long, and there were fatal magic traps everywhere. Just the door was guarded by 2 ancient mummies, and then there were 2 coffins inside. Creatures full of evil were hidden in them. Damn it! An angry roar came from the bottom of the underground tomb. A pale golden skeleton holding a staff looked at the test bench in front of him and roared, "Damn the goddess of magic and death, Verges!" Golden skeletons. The lich, whose entire body was made of golden bones, indicated his identity. He was the lich god Vishalan. Demigod-level lich liked to transform his body. After success, he would be immune to more than 85% of physical damage. The transformed form would be the golden skeleton in front of him. During the time of troubles, many demigod liches had turned into this form, and the lich god in front of him seemed to have just completed the transformation not long ago. Not long ago, the lich god Visharan was ambushed by the goddess of death and magic Verges. The powerful goddess of death and magic Verges killed the lich god on the spot. But, as a lich, Vishalan still had his phylactery. This gave him a chance to resurrect. After successfully resurrecting, the god of lich would be extremely weak, so he had no choice but to hide and avoid enemies. For some reason he hid here and tried to repair the phylactery. However, Verges, who was in charge of death, was not easy to deal with. The phylactery of the god of lich was severely damaged, and even his body had to be rebuilt. The golden skeleton was only at the level of a demigod. This golden skeleton was much weaker than his previous body. On the test bench in front of him, a strange metal box was suspended in the air, and it was full of cracks. This was the wound left by Verges, the goddess of death and magic. The divine power of death damaged the phylactery of the god of lich. The god of lich tried to repair the phylactery, but the avatar crisis limited his power, so several attempts ended in failure. No one knew when. The sky became dark. A thin and slender figure appeared near this cemetery, as if some kind of power shrouded this place, and all the will-o'-the-wisps stayed in place. Two little girls, one in black and one in white, wearing exquisite princess dresses appeared on the left. They looked happy and seemed to be playing some fun game. Occasionally they would get together and whisper a few words, as if they were plotting something interesting. On the other side, a beautiful witch quietly appeared. 36 golden tarot cards floated around her body. The scepter of Savras emitted a strange light, blocking all sensing and prophecy spells. She walked in the gloomy place as if waiting for someone's order. "Let's do it." Soren's figure turned into a stream of light and disappeared. Then Vivian and Lillian sped up, and Gloria launched Time Stop. "Brother." The sword of destruction appeared in Vivian's palm, and Lillian reached out and grabbed the flame whip from the void. The two little girls said at the same time, "Leave the things outside to us." The abnormal energy suddenly alarmed the ancient mummy guarding the door. Soren nodded and walked past the two creatures. Then when he passed the coffin, suddenly two black shadows rushed out. The pale and rotten ancient vampires appeared and screamed at Soren. Divine shock wave. Soren did not pay attention to these enemies. After a divine shock wave forced them back, he quickly moved forward. These enemies were dealt with by Vivian, Lillian, and Gloria. His goal was the god of Lich. The other party had sensed Soren's arrival and tried to escape, but the nearby space had been blocked. In the deepest part of the underground tomb, Soren's figure slowly appeared. At the moment he appeared, overwhelming spells fell. There were at least 5 legendary spells among the dozens of spells. In an instant, Soren's figure was drowned and then disappeared. No. The vigilant god of Lich immediately noticed the abnormality and quickly retreated. But it was too late. Another figure of Soren appeared, and the silver-white stream of light turned into a storm and slashed at him. It was Soren's simulacrum that had just entered the door. The god of Lich's carefully prepared round of attack was powerful. In an instant, the simulacrum, which had 60% of Soren's strength, was destroyed. "It's useless." Soren approached expressionlessly. Shadow Realm. Death Realm. Slaughter Realm. The realm close to the great divine power sealed the space. Soren quickly approached and then turned into a golden giant. God's Descent. He did not give the god of Lich any chance at all because the other party also had a part of the divine power of death. He also had the divine powers of immortality, liches, necromancers and necromancers. This was not an opponent that could be underestimated. The god of Lich may not be powerful, but the domains that he had mastered were also very deadly, including death, evil, magic and immortality. No. A desperate scream sounded. Soren's attack destroyed the body of the god of Lich in an instant. The difference between minor divine power and intermediate divine power was so huge. After losing the initial opportunity, the god of Lich could not resist at all under Soren's storm-like attacks. His physical body was destroyed. Then a golden soul appeared and instantly turned into a stream of light, ready to escape. Death Prison. Soren knew that it was easy to destroy the body of the god of Lich, but it was difficult to kill him. He used the divine power of death to seal the other party's soul, and then connected to the target's phylactery in an instant. With a surge of divine power, Soren directly launched the ability of divinity to destroy the other party's phylactery. Crack. The sound of something breaking was heard. The next moment, a row of data appeared in front of him. Killed god of Lich, Vishalan. Extracting soul energy from the target. You've gained 3650,000 slaughter EXP. Target has divinity. Extracting divinity from the target. You've gained 15 divinity. Target has divinity. Extracting divinity from the target. You've gained 12 divinity. Seize part of the target's divine power. Immortality, divine power extraction. Compatibility 55%. Part of the ability devoured and transformed into death, divine power. Lich, divine power extraction. Compatibility 25%. Part of the ability devoured and transformed into death, divine power. Necromancer, divine power extraction. Compatibility 15%. Part of the ability devoured and transformed into death, divine power. Mage, divine power extraction. Compatibility 75%. You've gained the domain of Mage. Necromancer, divine power extraction. Compatibility 45%. Your domain of mage has been strengthened. Your domain of death has been strengthened. Devour, domain of magic. Your domain of death has been upgraded. Divinity ability, death sense has been activated. From now on, you can use the ability to sense certain places where death has occurred. This divinity ability allows you to sense any death that has occurred in the target within 3 weeks. The golden light of divinity fused into Soren's body. But at the same time, a part of the divinity was rejected by Soren and flew towards the nearest target with the ability to fuse. A small part of the divinity fused into Vivian and Lillian's body, and a large part of it flew towards Gloria. As a pure northern witch, Gloria automatically absorbed part of the divinity and divine power that the god of Lich took from the god of mages. At the same time, Gloria obtained part of the divine power of mage and the domain of magic on top of her original abilities. The battle ended quickly. Because this was the territory of the Lady of Night's church, Soren did not dare to stay any longer. After killing the god of Lich, he immediately left with the others. But not long after Soren's figure left, an elegant woman wearing a gorgeous robe appeared. She frowned as she looked at the target in front of her and murmured, "Someone beat us to it?" Oh. Chapter 1038. Who is it? The goddess of magic and death, Verges, strolled in the gloomy graveyard. At this moment, her brows were furrowed and she seemed a little unhappy. The god of liches had always been her target. For this reason, the goddess of magic and death, Verges, even killed the god of liches once. However, because the other party had a phylactery, she at least damaged the phylactery in the end, reducing the other party's chances of resurrection. Since then, the whereabouts of the god of liches had become strange. There were almost no traces of him and it took her a lot of effort to find him. However, just before she arrived, the god of liches had already been killed. Looking at the traces left behind, it was at most half an hour ago. The goddess of magic and death, Verges, used the power of the divinity of death, trying to find traces of the first target. However, she actually couldn't see anything. She could only vaguely feel 2 shadows, one black and one white. The other party is also a god. The goddess of magic and death, Verges, murmured, and at least in existence with mid-level divine power. Otherwise, it would be impossible to interfere with my death perception. Then another beautiful female figure appeared. She continued, "There's someone else? A female mortal? No. It should be a demigod." The underground tomb had been completely destroyed. Verges found the bodies of 2 ancient mummies at the entrance. Without a doubt, their souls had been imprisoned and extracted. There were also vampires that had turned into ashes beside them. These should be the servants controlled by the god of liches. This god was very timid. Although Vishalin was the god of liches, he was very wary of liches. He was afraid that his divine power would be stolen by his own kind, so there were very few liches around him as servants. Most of the valuable things in the underground tomb had been looted clean. The person who took the lead should be a veteran. Even some of the test benches were directly emptied. The goddess of magic and death, Verges, finally came to the deepest part. She found traces of a battle. Other than the initial attack, it was almost a one-sided suppression. 2 mid-level divine powers gods. Verges fell into deep thought and muttered to herself, "I think I know who it is." 2 mid-level divine powers gods appeared at the same time, and they were one step ahead. Seems like only that deity with the ability of death and tracking can do that. Soren's identity was obvious. It was easy to find Soren, who held the divine title of tracking, because Vigus believed that other than Soren, there were few gods who could beat her to it. A little noise came from outside. Verges frowned slightly and sensed for a moment before saying softly, "It seems to be a disciple of Lady Night. Forget it, let's leave this place first." As a deity from another world, she did not want to interact with the Lady of the Night. This ancient goddess had a bad temper, and she was not friendly to the gods of the other world. In fact, most of the great divine powers were not very friendly to the gods of the other world. They thought that the gods of the other world were snatching their territory. For the gods with great divine power, the material plane was their territory. Mordor City. After returning from killing the Lich god, Soren was in a good mood. After a preliminary inventory of the spoils, he held Gloria in his arms and celebrated happily in the room. Even gods needed to relax once in a while. Although the Lich god Visharan was only a minor divine power, as a 2-sided fence sitter, he really had a lot of good things on him. At first, Visharan was immortal. Later, he was promoted to a god by the Lord of Storms. In order to escape the oppression of the Lord of Storms, this guy turned to the goddess of magic and thus became a god of the god of mages. As a result, this guy was not satisfied. He secretly reconciled with the Lord of Storms and secretly expressed goodwill to Lady of the Night. He took advantage of this to strengthen himself. At first glance, he was a typical fence-sitter. However, this fence-sitter was a big winner in the Avatar crisis. After the goddess of magic had an accident, he immediately betrayed and plotted against the god of mages. At the same time, he seized part of his priesthood and divine power. If he had not been killed by Verges, the goddess of magic and death, and finally died in the hands of Soren, the Lich God would have quickly mastered the priesthood of mage and directly promoted to a lesser divine power. It might even have been promoted all the way to an intermediate divine power. It is necessary to mention the priesthood and domain of the fallen god of mages, Azaz. His priesthood was wizard, mage, and spellcaster in the general sense. His domain was illusion, knowledge, magic, order, and spells. Azaz was once the first preaching mage and the most powerful mortal mage at that time. He defeated the god of prophecy, Savras, and imprisoned him in the scepter. Now the scepter was in the hands of Gloria. It was obvious that the Lich god Visharan and the god of mages, Azaz, had a lot of compatible abilities. The first was the priesthood of wizard and mage. The Lich god mastered the necromancer, which was only one of the professions of mage. Then there were illusions, knowledge, magic, and spells. These were all powers that the Lich god could absorb. Unfortunately, this guy's talent was not very good. Until now, he had only fused with the domain of magic. Soren found the weapon of the god of mages in the Lich god's treasure vault. It was a grade 3 artifact, their old staff. It had a very simple name, but the power of the god of mages was sealed. It included wizard, mage, illusion, knowledge, and spells. It seemed that the Lich god learned very quickly. He even learned the method that the god of mages used to deal with the god of prophecy. It really felt like an eye for an eye. The soul of the god of mages had already been scattered. The old staff itself was not a very powerful artifact. Its most important role was to help the god of mages repair the magic net. There were remnants of Azutha's soul fragments in it, and Soren could absorb mage and knowledge. As for the other abilities, Soren already had enough domains. So he was prepared to give it to Gloria and the Fallen Witch to see what they could gain from it. Gloria currently had the abilities of prophecy, wizard, knowledge, and so on. If she could gain the power of spells and illusion, then she would very likely replace Azaz and become the new god of mages. This was a very good idea. According to Soren's judgment, there would be a battle between the goddess of magic, the Lady of Silvermoon, and the Lady of Night. It was hard to say who would win in the end. If something happened to the goddess of magic, then Gloria might have a chance to replace her after becoming the god of mages. The weave was very important in Soren's future plans. If Gloria could control the power of the weave, then not only would she be of great help to Soren, but she could also help him limit the abuse of the weave by mortals. If Soren wanted to become a greater divine power, there were many things that he needed to rely on the weave. Night fell. Gloria, with a satisfied expression, went to the arcane tower to study a new staff, while Soren prepared to deal with Naruto and Sirik. Just as the night was getting darker, a tall and plump figure appeared outside the door. The Fallen Witch stood at the door and hesitated for a moment. Then she pushed the door open and entered Soren's room. "Is it time?" Soren glanced at her and raised his eyebrows. The Fallen Witch nodded gently and then said, "I already have some clues about the plague of the undead. Give me some more time and I should be able to solve it." Soren nodded and then said, "Maybe you should try the realm of the gods. The Avatar crisis has broken out. This is the best time and the worst time. If you miss this opportunity, even in the future, I won't be able to help you easily become a god. In the future, Gloria and I will both go to the kingdom of God. I think you don't want to stay alone in the material plane. Since you already have the divinity of the goddess of pestilence, you should try to explore the realm of the gods further." The Fallen Witch fell into deep thought and then said, "I will try. Becoming a god. This kind of thing was really a bit far away for mortals. If it wasn't for the Avatar crisis, it might not be possible to succeed in thousands of years. Let's begin." Soren put down the book in his hand and waved his hand. The space around them was sealed. The Fallen Witch's face was flushed and she walked to Soren meekly. Then she slowly knelt down like a little bitch. It seems that I have to find a way to solve the problem on your body. Soren's expression was a little subtle, but he still said in a deep voice, I have all the influence in the abyss. If possible, I will find a way to help you remove the mark on your body. The trace of the Queen of Succubus. Soren had been a little aware of it, but this demon lord was not easy to deal with. Her combat power might not be strong, but her ability was very strange, almost reaching the extreme of a certain field. This kind of extreme conversion of aura, even Soren might not be able to resist. Especially when he was only in the form of a saint. It must be known that the previous generation's Lady of Wealth ventured into the abyss in the form of a saint to sneak back to the kingdom of God. She was imprisoned by the original Six-Fingered, and as a result she was humiliated for many years. This was a very embarrassing thing. Because even the powerful gods might not be able to defeat the demon lord in the form of a saint. Of course, if he was in the form of a god there would be no fear. Basically, there were no natural enemies in the form of a god, unless there was a problem inside the kingdom of God. A crisp sound reverberated in the air, accompanied by the faint sound of a woman's moaning. Soren faithfully completed the contract ceremony to please the Queen of Succubus, but his mind had turned to the abyss. After stealing a large number of souls from the Styx, both the demon lord and the kingdom of God had greatly increased in strength. He was considering whether it was time to expand and separate a layer of the abyss. At that time, his demon lord would be the real, abyss overlord. Chapter 1039. The Land of Silver. Inside a majestic temple, a strange magical energy shrouded the place. Because there was a huge silver mine nearby, this territory had always been quite rich. It was located in a mountainous area, a bit like Chengdu Prefecture in Soren's previous life, which was surrounded by mountains. Therefore, even the undead calamity didn't cause too much of an impact. On the other hand, this place belonged to the Lady of Silvermoon. Perhaps because it was close to the territory of the forest elves, the women in the Land of Silver were all beautiful, fair-skinned, and fierce-tempered. In the Land of Silver, women's status was almost equal to men's, and they could even be city officials and so on. This was relatively rare in the south. This environment was conducive to the Lady of Silvermoon's faith, and she was especially popular among matriarchal women. At this moment, two women were seated within the shrine. One of them was tall and slender with long flowing black hair. She was Mistra, the current goddess of magic. The other had long silver hair, emerald green eyes, delicate facial features and slender legs. This was one of the incarnations of the Lady of Silvermoon. This goddess had many incarnations. Sometimes her incarnation was a ghostly young girl with black hair and pupils, wearing a transparent moonlight robe. Sometimes, her incarnation was a dignified and gentle noble woman. Soren's incarnation would also be bright or dim according to the cycle of the moon. This change in appearance didn't affect her actual power. Soren knew that her sister was very happy to destroy her incarnations to weaken herself, so she rarely sent her incarnations to the material plane. She often sent her incarnations to various outer realms to search for all kinds of magic and weapons, hoping to destroy the Lady of the Night forever. Azuz has completely fallen. The goddess of magic stood up, closed her eyes and whispered, "Just now, I felt a powerful force erase Azuz's soul imprint. Part of the mage divinity was transferred to me, but most of it was taken by someone else." The god of mages was a subordinate of the goddess of magic and spent most of his time helping her repair the magic net. The god of lich didn't completely kill Azuz, but imprisoned him in the scepter. Soren didn't have much affection for this god, so to avoid trouble, he directly erased Azuz's soul consciousness. Lady Silvermoon's expression was grave as she muttered, "Really? It seems that our strength has weakened again. This must be Shar's scheme. The lich god has long since joined her." Su Luan hated his sister very much. These two goddesses had been fighting ever since they were born, but until now there had been no clear winner. There are also traces of Naruto's involvement in this matter. The goddess of magic took a few steps and said slowly, "My power is recovering. After taking back part of the mage priesthood, I should be able to recover 70% of my former power. However, due to my disappearance, many evil faction wizards have joined Lady Knight's side. This is not conducive to our plan." Lady Silvermoon frowned. After a while she said, "The moonlight is dim. The Avatar crisis has affected my power. Only by next year's full moon will I be able to regain my full strength. Maybe we should postpone our plan for now. Char has been involved in Naruto's conspiracy. The gods certainly won't sit back and watch Naruto advance to a greater divine power. When Naruto is ready to extract the power of death from this world to advance, the other gods will certainly not be able to resist taking action. At that time, maybe we can find an opportunity. The failure to kill Clemvox meant that Naruto's plot was not completely successful. However, he had another plan. Now that the realm of eternal rest in the material plane was destroyed, the power of death became more and more intense. When the time was right, Naruto would inevitably absorb the power of death from the whole world and then use this as an opportunity to directly advance to a greater divine power. This was a very huge force. The more creatures died in the material plane, the more intense the power of death gathered. If Naruto succeeded in the integration, he would certainly advance. Yes. The goddess of magic nodded. The others certainly won't sit back and watch. At that time, Clemvox will also appear, or he will never have another chance. And I sense that Sirik has come out. With his ambition and madness, he will never allow Naruto to become a greater divine power. At that time, the gods will be involved in the dispute. The Lady of Silvermoon thought for a moment and then said, "Right. What do you think of the one in the Outer Islands?" Hearing the Lady of Silvermoon's words, the goddess of magic's face could not help but blush slightly, and then she said as if nothing had happened, "Him? Without a doubt he is favored by fate. Very powerful. Also very cold. He is the son of slaughter. In the face of Naruto's advancement, he certainly can't sit still and wait for death. At that time he will definitely make a move." The Lady of Silvermoon nodded in agreement and said slowly, "The Dread Lord has completely fallen. The little girl with him should also be a mid-level divine power. In that case he will be a very powerful helper. However, he seems to be deviating towards evil even more seriously, and I feel the breath of the abyss on him." Both goddesses were in the good camp. They could not completely trust Soren, even the goddess of magic. Otherwise, she would not be hiding at the Lady of Silvermoon's place, but would have asked Soren for help. "Hasn't the goddess of the forest, Mei Li Kai, made a move yet?" the Lady of Silvermoon suddenly asked. The goddess of magic shook her head and said, "Not yet. Mei Li Kai is more patient than before. I don't know what she is preparing. Since the fall of the Oak Tree Father, the natural divine system has rarely intervened in worldly battles, and Loshanda has become the current Lord of Light." The Lady of Silvermoon hesitated and said, "What do you think of Loshanda now?" Hearing the other party's words, the goddess of magic showed a rare trace of fear and whispered, "He is very scary now. I feel that he is no longer the light of dawn of the past. His ideas are becoming more and more paranoid, as if he is ready to purify everything with the glory of Mountain Paradise. I am worried that when he starts to act, it will be another outbreak of the calamity of dawn." The Lord of Light's past was not easy to evaluate. When he was still the light of dawn, he had already brought disaster to the gods because of his overly persistent beliefs. So, the gods were now a little afraid of him. Even the gods of the good alignment were the same, and even the goddess of agriculture kept an appropriate distance from her father. Perhaps the only ones who really followed him were those stubborn paladins and fanatics. In the past, there was still Mother Earth to influence him, but now the Lord of Light had completely become the Lord of Light. The self-sacrifice of the Oak Tree Father had changed him a lot. So, the Lady of Silvermoon sighed and said, "If only the Oak Tree Father was still here. If he was here, the calamity of the undead would definitely not break out, and the Oak Tree Father would directly purify and maintain the balance of nature." The Oak Tree Father was a hardline god. He didn't even have a camp. His camp was nature. Whether good or evil, as long as the balance of nature was destroyed, it was his enemy. The most powerful natural divine system had become a thing of the past. Although there were many gods in the human divine system, they had been divided. Even the god of war had become very cautious, so no one had stopped Naruto's conspiracy until now. No one wanted to be the first to take the lead. Mordor City. Soren, who was evaluated by the two goddesses, also seemed to have a premonition of Naruto's plan, because the rich power of death had increased his divine power. The energy core of Mies had been placed in the arcane tower. Within the range of the arcane tower, the high-grade witches of Mordor City could enjoy this convenience. They could make magic tools more easily. However, the effect of this kind of improvement was not obvious in a short time. It often took time for a qualitative change to occur. But now the arcane shop in Mordor City had begun to sell magic equipment. Just when Soren's attention was focused on the bottomless abyss, he felt a kind of call in the dark, and then he shifted his attention to the Eastern Kingdom. In a barren desert. A girl named Cicada was walking alone in the desert. She had completed the training of the Lost Trace sect and truly mastered the mystery of Shadow Trace. Suddenly, the legendary realm made her spirit sublimated, and even Soren felt it. Her talent is really good. Soren closed his eyes and looked at the girl in front of him with his spirit, and said to himself, "It seems that we can get ready to act. A monk order. This should be able to strengthen the church." Soren had already prepared to form a monk order. There were too many wanderers in the church and it was too simple. The monks of the Eastern Kingdom had all kinds of powerful and mysterious powers. With the girl, Cicada, as an opportunity, Soren was ready to attract some monks to join the church. Maybe it's time to give her an oracle. Soren thought. The wind was howling. The girl walking alone in the desert stopped, and in front of her, a demon wearing a bamboo hat appeared. Since the appearance of the ancient evil, the Eastern Kingdom had also suffered turmoil. Demons and undead were only one of them. The demon that had not been seen for a long time began to appear frequently. The demon was also called the demon beast ghost. It was said that it was a creature that appeared with the desert gods. The most dangerous one was the demon lord, who was a terrible enemy in the Eastern Kingdom. These creatures were immune to 1 to 6 spells, and enchanted weapons below +2 were almost difficult for mortals to defeat. At present, the Eastern Princess was busy dealing with the demon lord. She could not even take care of her own territory. Piercing shock palm. This was not the first demon that Cicada had encountered. At the moment when she found the enemy, she sped up and rushed directly. Penetration. The special ability of the Lost Trace sect made Cicada's figure like a ghost. Although her palm was blocked by the enemy, the next moment, the demon spat out a mouthful of blood. Sun flame form. The fist master who succeeded in one move followed up with another attack. With a loud bang, the demon in front of him was directly hit and flew out. At this time, the enemy had time to say a sentence, Transcendence. Chapter 1040. There were 2 types of monks. One was the normal monk and the other was the legendary monk. Divine Transcendence was a terrifying ability to enhance a monk's strength. Monks who had broken through to this realm were no longer considered mortals. Ordinary weapons could no longer harm them, and on top of this, legendary monks could also obtain additional damage reduction. In the Eastern countries, monks were actually very popular among women. However, there were still very few women who could become monks. At most, they could only become dancers. The reason was that monks had the special ability of ageless body. This was the key reason why they were far more superior than warriors. As mentioned before, warriors were very strong in the early stage and much stronger than monks in the middle stage. However, once they reached middle age, their power would decrease rapidly. This was the aging of the body. Mortals could not resist it. However, monks were different from warriors. Monks had the ability to adjust their bodies. After reaching level 17, they could stop all the aging process and stabilize themselves at the current stage. In other words, monks would not age until they died, and their power would not decrease rapidly like warriors. Under normal circumstances, monks with ageless body would only age rapidly at the moment of death. This was the reason why women wanted to become monks. To them, it was to keep their appearance forever. Generally, female monks in the East would maintain the appearance of a middle-aged woman as long as they survived. Some of the more talented ones would forever maintain the appearance of a 20-year-old woman. For example, Cicada in front of him would never continue to age. Clang. In the second round, Cicada used Wuxia demon's weapon empty-handed. She only had a thin silk glove on her hand. This was a treasure given by the White Cloud sect. It could withstand +5 magical weapons with her bare hands. Without this equipment, Cicada's ability would at most be able to resist a +3 weapon. Bang bang bang. A fierce whip kick came like a shadow. Cicada's attack speed was shockingly fast. After dodging the enemy's attack, she attacked more than 10 times in an instant. Wuxia demon retreated. Although he blocked most of the attacks, he still kept spitting out blood. This was the hidden energy technique. Monks from the East could directly penetrate most defensive effects. To them, enemies wearing heavy armor could also be easily defeated. Bang. Cicada's figure retreated after a series of attacks. Then, it took a deep breath and suddenly punched at the Wuxia demon in front of it from a distance of about 30 feet. Boom. Wuxia Yao's figure flew out, his chest clearly caved in, and a clear fist imprint appeared. External release of chi force? Soren's eyes widened as he muttered, I didn't expect this little girl to be so talented. There were 3 stages to a monk's KI. The first stage was the hidden force, which could break through the enemy's defense. The most commonly used move was the penetrating force. The second stage was to attach chi to the body. The more common abilities were the ethereal body and the penetrating shock palm. The third stage was the release of chi. The sun flame style and the hollow bright fist that Chan had just used belonged to this category. If it was in the east, it would be called 100 Steps Divine Fist. This was a move that could attack the enemy from a distance. It was a huge threat to spellcasters. The scariest people who used this ability were the Cloud Monks. They had lived much longer than others, and the chi in their body was unbelievably strong. Cicada's punch shattered the Luo Xiaoyao's heart. After killing the enemy, she rested for a while and then went to clean up the battlefield. Soren watched all of this silently. However, he was thinking in his mind. He said to himself, "It is indeed necessary to train a group of monks. The disadvantages of rogues are not obvious at the moment. But after more than 10 years, these rogues will be older, and their flexibility will not be as good as now. My church only has priests in the spellcasting department. Although there are half-elves in the melee department, they also need to be replenished." Rogues and warriors were the same. As long as the race was human after the age of 45, if they had not broken through the realm of legends, their strength would rapidly decline. Although their experience would become rich, their overall attributes would decrease. Half-elves were slightly better. They could probably maintain their peak state until about 65 years old. The advantage of monks was that after entering the higher level, they could maintain their peak state even after 100 years. This was very useful for a church. As long as a group of monks was trained, according to the lifespan of humans and the generally long lifespan of monks, even if they did not replenish new blood, they could probably last for about 120 years. This was quite a long time even for a deity. Since he had an idea, he was naturally ready to act. Soren immediately found the high priest and said, "I am going to set up a group of monks. The preliminary candidates have been decided. You can prepare in the church." Cicada had entered the realm of legends. It was enough for her to be the leader of the group of monks. The Eastern Kingdom did not lack monks, but Soren needed monks from the evil camp. This required him to secretly help Cicada recruit people. Just right. Soren's avatar was also ready to go to the Eastern Kingdom to see what was going on there. Because the distance was too far, there were a lot of scattered news. Most of it was related to ancient evils and Luo Xiaoyao, but Soren could not see it clearly. In the desert, Cicada quickly collected the spoils of war from the Luo Xiaoyao. She did not make a vow of poverty, so now she was somewhat valuable. The feeling of being spied on disappeared. Since entering the realm of legends, her senses had become stronger and stronger. Especially the sensing ability brought by meditation, she could vaguely sense Soren's existence. The girl moved forward very quickly. About an hour later, a broken city wall appeared in front of her. This was an abandoned town. It used to be an oasis with a population of about 5,000. However, after the outbreak of the turmoil last year, the oasis had been covered by the desert. The wind and sand had destroyed everything here. Now it was a place occupied by Luo Xiaoyao. In order to fight against the frequent evils, most of the high-level monks had their own missions. Cicada's mission was to clean up the Luo Xiaoyao here. Dismal Wind Valley. An ancient battlefield that had existed for hundreds of years. The overly tragic war had caused ghosts to surround this land. Now it had become a paradise for the undead. "My lord." A figure holding a huge scythe entered and then went through an underground passage to an underground temple. This undead that looked like an attendant of death knelt down on one knee and said, "The god of liches has fallen. The members of the Dragon Witch cult and the Dragon cultists have been defeated, but the Dragon liches they resurrected are enough to start our plan." A pitch-black skull appeared, and Naruto's voice sounded on the altar. "Who killed the god of liches?" The attendant of death said respectfully, "The Shadow Master, Soren." Naruto hesitated and said slowly, "It's him again?" The attendant of death nodded and said, "Should we start the ceremony according to the original plan? The power of death has spread throughout the entire material plane. The 12 altars on the main road are ready." Naruto fell into deep thought and said, "Let's do it according to the plan." However, the Shadow Master, Soren, is a problem. He inherited the power of the 3 death gods, so he's a potential enemy for me. There's nothing to be afraid of if he's alone, but I don't know where Clemvox is hiding. If they're secretly working together, it'll be troublesome. The attendant of death suddenly said, "My lord." Aren't we still controlling the unkillable king Orcus? Although this undead king isn't strong enough after being resurrected, he still controls a large number of demons in the abyss. Before the ceremony starts, we can send Orcus to attack the outer islands. This will definitely hold him back, and we can deal with the Shadow Master after he becomes a greater god. The former great lord of the abyss had fallen several times. Although he was successfully resurrected one after another, Orcus's strength was decreasing every time he was resurrected. The chaos was getting deeper and deeper into his soul. In this undead calamity, Orcus, who was resurrected by the undead lords, was almost completely turned into a puppet under their control. Let Orcus attack the outer islands? Naruto fell into deep thought and said slowly, if we do that, we'll be enemies with the Shadow Master in the future. Yes, let's do that. As long as I become a greater god and master the Death God system, the Shadow Master will be an enemy that needs to be eradicated sooner or later. Let Orcus summon the undead army. Before the ceremony starts, I want to see the demon army attack the city of Mordor. A meaningful smile appeared at the corner of the Death God's attendant's mouth and he replied, yes, Master. The brilliance on the altar gradually dissipated. As Naruto's figure disappeared, the attendant of death in front of him quickly retreated. However, just as his figure left the temple, a faint divine brilliance emerged from his body and turned into a beautiful woman with black hair and disappeared with a chuckle. The attendant of death's eyes flickered a little. He stood in place for a while before he began to carry out his master's arrangement. In order to perfectly hold the ceremony to promote to a greater god, my lord Naruto was going to launch an attack on the outer islands and secretly control the undead king, Orcus's abyss army to attack the city of Mordor. This would distract the attention of the Shadow Master and weaken the enemy's strength in the material plane. Although it was dangerous to completely anger the Shadow Master at this moment, since it was his master's order, he could only carry it out. Chapter 1041. The Boat of the Desert. In the flying yellow sand, a group of women in bamboo hats moved forward quickly. These women had tall and graceful figures. Although they were covered with thick clothes, they still could not hide their beauty. This was a group of high-grade Oriental dancers. There were many gadgets in their seemingly cumbersome dresses, including poisons, hidden weapons, daggers, casting materials, and so on. There was even a hidden button under the skirt on the back of some Oriental dancers. As long as it was gently untied, they could remove the obstacle and sit on a man's lap to enjoy the pleasure of sex without leaving a trace. They were the minions of the Eastern Empress. Although their means were vicious and they controlled many gray areas, they still did some things like adopting orphans and helping the poor. Everything was relative. Human beings were a very complicated race. It was difficult to have pure good or evil people. The Oriental dancers were between good and evil. They were led by the Empress to fight for women's power. The desert country was formerly controlled by the Muhammad divine system. Under the influence of this divine system, the status of women inside was extremely low. There was even a matter of cutting off the female emperor homonym. Later, this divine system was expelled, and the profession of the Oriental dancer was born in the turmoil, and quickly controlled the gray area of the desert country. The Eastern Empress herself was an ambitious figure. She was worshipped by many women, and her origin was unknown. It was said that she was a rebel against the desert divine system. The most dazzling and eye-catching in the crowd was the Eastern Empress. However, at the moment, she did not look as graceful and elegant as before. Although she was still beautiful, a trace of fatigue and worry appeared on her face. In any case, the Eastern Empress was still a mortal. As a mortal, she had her own limitations. Although she had a large number of assassins and dancers under her command, she could only barely protect herself in the turbulent year of the Holy Sage. Especially after the appearance of creatures such as ancient evil things, ancient mummies, Furlan magic sunflower, and Luo Sha demon, the sphere of influence of the Eastern Empress gradually shrank. Many secretly controlled towns were forced to give up, and people migrated to the southern area of the Eastern Kingdom. Empress. The figure of the Fist Master, D, appeared. She returned through the desert like a gust of wind and came to the front of the dance group. The front has been occupied by the Luo Sha demon monarch. They seem to be controlled by an ancient evil creature, and I see a lot of twisted aberrations ahead. The Eastern Empress's expression was extremely solemn. She nodded and said to the middle-aged dancer beside her, "Have the other members of the martial monk cult arrived?" "He's almost here," the middle-aged dancer said. That legendary existence should be coming as well. The Eastern Crown Princess's expression relaxed a lot when she heard this. She said slowly, "Is that so? Looks like we have a much higher chance of winning this battle." Behind the Eastern Empress, there was an army composed of professionals, including the Oriental Dancer, the Assassin, the Ranger, the Puppet Master, the 3 factions of monks, as well as the White Cloud sect and the legendary monks who were waiting for their arrival. Such a powerful lineup was enough to fight against many deities. However, even against such a powerful team, the Eastern Empress didn't have a high chance of winning. This was because they were facing an ancient evil being. Furthermore, it was one of the most terrifying ancient evils. Its name was Zargan, ruler of hell. The wind howled. The thick smell of blood filled the air. The believers of these ancient evils destroyed 3 cities and captured a large number of mortals for blood sacrifice. They were worshipping a terrifying horn. This horn was the main body of the ancient evils, or a terrifying existence that had died. The terminator of all things, the ancient elemental I, the god of darkness, the patient, the waiting, the cursed, the father of the ancient evils, the source of all evil, the embodiment of the eternal darkness, the devourer of all worlds, the scorner, and the destroyer. A strange chant echoed in the air. Some kind of evil aura halo shrouded the town filled with blood in front of them. Even the Eastern Empress was a little shaken for a while. This was the unique ability of the ancient evils. Often, the appearance of an ancient evils would be accompanied by a vision, and it might even change the climate of the entire world. What exactly is Zargan? A young-looking ranger asked. Why haven't I heard a word about it? The monk next to him was silent. After a while, a male monk who looked like a legendary fist master said, Zargan is one of the oldest ancient evils sealed in the Eastern Kingdom. Before Asmodeus, Zargan was the ruler of hell. He was the leader of the ancient Bartholomew. When Asmodeus and his companions attacked hell, Zargan and Asmodeus fought a great battle. Asmodeus tore Zargan's flesh into pieces, but he couldn't destroy Zargan's horn. In the end, he threw Zargan's horn into the deep underground of a world in the main material plane. Around the horn, Zargan's flesh gradually recovered. On the ground above him, a country called Synodicia gradually flourished. But in the end, this country went into decline. A group of believers who saw Zargan as their true god invaded and finally destroyed this country. When a barbarian named Zanker led his army to attack the capital controlled by the ancient evils, he finally found the true face of the god he believed in, a ferocious and violent beast. In order to save his people, the barbarian and Zargan fought fiercely. After 7 days and 7 nights of fighting, although Zanker was the strongest and fiercest warrior, he still lost in the end. Every time he hurt Zargan a little, Zargan's injury would immediately heal in a moment. Zanker, who had exhausted all his strength, finally fell under the attack of the ancient evils. The gods blessed Zanker, hoping that he could defeat the ancient evils, but they were disappointed in the end. So the gods decided to do it themselves. With a mocking smile, Zargan killed some of the gods and drove the other gods back to their countries. Maybe the death and defeat of the gods didn't matter to Asmodeus, but he knew that Zargan was a threat to him. So at the last moment of the battle, Asmodeus finally did it himself. Asmodeus finally defeated Zargan again, but he knew that he couldn't kill him. So Asmodeus bound Zargan's horn in a solid boulder and buried it deep in the ground. The area where the horn was buried was the center of the ancient empire of Imaska, which is where we are now. The Avatar crisis had loosened the ancient seal. Not only had the god of murder, Sirik, escaped, but some terrible ancient evils had also escaped from captivity. Hearing the words of the Master of Fist, many people could not help but swallow. Then someone said, since the enemy is so strong, even the gods can't defeat him. So, is it possible for us to reseal him? Of course, the Master of Fist said firmly. Zargan is still very weak. He has just broken the seal and he hasn't even been fully resurrected. As long as we destroy his believers and the altar of his resurrection, he can be resealed. This terrible evil is an enemy we can't escape from. Once he is fully resurrected, the first thing he will do is to destroy and control the material plane, and then turn all living things into evil creatures. Finally, he will challenge Asmodeus of the Bator Inferno again. Zargan knew that he could not defeat the Lord of Hell, so the first thing he had to do was to build a huge army. This needed to devour a plane. People were still immersed in the legends of ancient times. Suddenly, some figures appeared in the distant sky, and then all the monks could not help but bow humbly. A middle-aged warrior monk of unknown age slowly descended from the clouds. He stepped in the air as if there was an invisible substitute, and came to the Oriental dancer step by step. Master. In the face of this legendary existence, even the Oriental Empress could not help but bow. The long life had made the Cloud Monk in front of her forget a lot. He even ignored the peerless beauty of the Oriental Empress. He just looked ahead and frowned. Is Zargan going to be resurrected? Let's do it. You deal with the evil followers outside, and I will go in and deal with Zargan's horn. Tell all those who are not legendary not to get close to the altar. The aura of the ancient evils can affect people's minds. They just need to deal with the monsters outside. The Cloud Monk's expression was neither sad nor happy. In his unknown life, it was not the first time that he fought against the ancient evils. He almost did not touch the ground and he stepped into the town in front of him. Some Rakshasa demons and twisted evil creatures found his trace and rushed directly toward him. The Cloud Monk almost did not look at them and he just hit the air with his palm. Boom. Suddenly, the earth shook, and a huge handprint of about 10 meters high appeared on the city wall in front of him. As for the Rakshasa demons who tried to attack the Cloud Monk, they had already become a pool of blurred flesh and blood on the wall. Is this the air-splitting palm? A boxing master was stunned and murmured, "It's so powerful? Grandmaster's aura is so powerful that it's incredible." The Cloud Monk went straight to the heart of the evil creatures. This legendary existence could shake the earth and mountains with just a wave of his hand. His casual attack was no less than the power of a god. Almost no cultist could stop him. To a certain extent, the gods walking in the mortal world were not as powerful as him. At least, they were far inferior when they were in the form of saints. Only when they mobilized their divine power to transform into the form of gods could the gods have the ability to move the earth and shake the mountains like this Cloud Monk. Even Soren was only an advanced legendary class in his normal state, and the Cloud Monk in front of him was probably infinitely close to or even beyond level 40. How powerful was a warrior monk who was close to level 40? In the historical records, only one warrior monk had reached such a height. Under the influence of the succubus queen, he finally defeated the demon prince, Demogorgon. Chapter 1042. The afterglow of the setting sun dyed the city of Mordor with a golden glow. It was rare for Soren to stand on the tower and enjoy a moment of peace. Looking back on his experience along the way, he was racing against time almost every moment. He had never enjoyed the extravagant life of this world. Now the Avatar crisis had entered the last stage. As long as he survived the last wave from hell, Soren could enjoy the comfortable time after becoming a god with his most important person. This was a very long time. Soren had enough time to squander extravagantly. 100 years, 200 years, 300 years. If it was not enough, he could spend 1,000 years, 2,000 years, or 3,000 years. As an immortal god, as long as Soren wanted, he could do whatever he wanted without hesitation. And all this could be obtained as long as he survived the Avatar crisis. At that time, the status of the gods would be stabilized, and they would no longer fall easily in the hands of others. Soft footsteps could be heard. Fallen Witch Karina's figure appeared. She was stunned when she saw Soren standing under the setting sun. Then she walked over to him and whispered, "It's rare to see you so leisurely." "Really?" Soren turned around and smiled. Then he looked into the distance and said, "Since the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, I have been racing against time. In the past, it was to protect Vivian, and later it was to deal with other crises. But fortunately, everything is coming to an end. I have a hunch that the energy storm is gradually weakening, and it may end by the end of next year at the latest. At that time, I will have enough time to arrange my future life." Fallen Witch was shocked when she heard this, and then she was a little disappointed. "Go to the kingdom of God?" "That's true. Whether it's you or Vivian, you will eventually go to the kingdom of God." Soren turned around and looked at her. For a long time, Fallen Witch had proved her loyalty with her actions, and because of some rituals, the estrangement between her and Soren had gradually decreased, and their relationship had become intimate. Karina met Soren's gaze. Soren suddenly smiled and said slowly, "If you're willing, you can also enjoy immortality with us. Gloria is about to become a god. You also have divinity in your body. As long as we get rid of the succubus queen's imprint, it won't be difficult for me to help you become a god. But in the end you still have to make the choice." The Fallen Witch walked the path of the Arcane Empire. Unlike Soren, her ultimate goal was to become a destiny wizard or a grand arcanist. If she chose to become a god, she would have to give up some things and become a guardian of the laws alongside Soren. The gods were incredibly powerful, but they also maintained the order of the world. It was like a job for them, and they didn't have as much freedom as the great arcanists. The power granted by the laws also came with obligations. The duty of these gods was to maintain the operation of the sun, moon, and stars, and to maintain the order of many rules. The multiverse itself was orderly. The gods were supposed to maintain everything, and it had been so since ancient times. Even in the face of the multiverse's greatest crisis, which was the earliest invasion of the demons, the gods never retreated even if some of them died. The fallen which hesitated for a moment and then said, "I don't know. I've persisted for so long. Although it's hard to refuse to become a god." But Soren smiled and said, "Arcana isn't outside the path of the gods. In the future, my plan will also use arcana in many places. You can think about Gloria's current path. She may surprise you in the future." Gloria was also a witch, and she could become an arcanist at any time if she wanted to. But she chose to stand side by side with Soren, and eventually control arcana as a god. Night fell. Soren returned to his study. Suddenly, as if he had sensed something, his whole body trembled, and then he said to himself, "Is Cicada in danger?" Cicada had Soren's mark on her body. This mark was similar to an apostle, and it was also on the Saint Cardinal Milan's body. If she was in mortal danger, Soren would be able to sense it directly. The next moment, Soren's vision turned to the faraway Eastern Kingdom. At this moment, it was still dusk in the Eastern Kingdom, but what Soren saw was blood and corpses all over the ground. There were humans, monsters, and many twisted aberrations. There was also an aura that Soren didn't like. It was the aura of an ancient evil creature. The gods hated any ancient evil creatures, and rejected everything related to the abominations. A terrifying monster appeared in front of Soren's eyes. In front of him was a huge altar, and there were dark red blood sacrifices all over it. He didn't know how many people were sacrificed. Cicada's figure was on the side of the altar. There were already many corpses nearby. After eliminating the Rakshasas and evil creatures on the periphery, all the legendary professionals joined the battle against Zargan. Zargan had more than 10 terrifying tentacles, and Cicada was hit by one of them. Her defense was instantly broken, and her internal organs were almost shattered with one hit. "Am I going to die?" Blood flowed from the corner of Cicada's mouth, and her consciousness was a little blurry. Her expression showed a trace of sadness and unwillingness. It wasn't easy for her to reach the legendary level, but she didn't expect to die here. She didn't regret it because sealing the ancient evil was the mission of the monks. For a long time, countless monks had stepped forward one after another, and it was unknown how many legendary powerhouses had fallen, but no one had ever regretted or retreated. This was their mission. From the moment they became monks, they knew that they might have to face all of this in the future. All the monasteries existed for this reason. For a long time, the entire Eastern Kingdom supported monks' monasteries, and when the ancient evil creatures appeared, they had to fulfill their mission to seal these terrifying monsters. Cicada didn't regret it, but she was a little unwilling. Her consciousness gradually blurred. Although her shattered internal organs didn't kill her instantly, it wouldn't be long before she died. His mind started to become muddled. Just as Cicada thought that he was about to enter the Netherworld River, a gentle male voice rang out. "With injuries of this degree as my chosen, it won't be that easy for you to die." A little golden light appeared. Cicada didn't know when, but a young man with an evil aura appeared in front of her. His body was shrouded in fog, but he exuded an indescribable pressure. No one knew when he appeared, and no one noticed his arrival, whether it was the Cloud Monk or the ancient evil creatures. Greater restoration. Soren's fingertips gently touched Cicada's forehead, and the next moment, Cicada's body recovered at a speed visible to the naked eye. The restoration spell cast by the gods was so powerful that Cicada had been completely restored in almost a breath. All the injuries had been healed, and she had almost returned to her peak state. Shadow Lord. Cicada recognized Soren at once, which made her involuntarily kneel down on one knee. This was an emotion that was hard to resist. An ancient evil creature? Soren turned his head to look at the monster in front of him, then frowned. Zargan? I didn't expect it to run out in the end. He had traveled to the Eastern Kingdom before. Naturally, he knew that Zargan was one of the most dangerous ancient evil creatures in the Eastern Kingdom. Zargan was a monster that was killed and sealed by the Lord of Hell, Asmodeus. This was the second time it appeared, but it was also the last time because adventurers with the ability of the Son of Slaughter could completely destroy it. Zargan was a behemoth of about 10 meters tall. Its whole body was covered with dark scales, and it only had one blood-red eye. Its bloody mouth was full of sharp teeth, and its head looked like an eye demon. The torso and limbs of its body were terrible tentacles. There were 6 tentacles on each side, and the lower body had about 10 tentacles. This terrible monster had a trace of divinity. It was the former Lord of Hell, the ruler of the indigenous people of Bator. When Asmodeus entered Hell, this monster had fought with him, but it was killed by the Lord of Hell. Because it could not destroy its horn, the Lord of Hell finally threw it into the material plane and sealed it. It was a very powerful enemy. When it was first resurrected, it had even defeated the gods. However, its resurrection this time was not very powerful because it had just broken the seal and had not completed the blood sacrifice. It used a kingdom to recover to its peak, but now the Eastern Kingdom was guarded by monks, and the population was scattered. It was almost impossible for it to recover to its peak in a short time. Cloud Monk. Soren saw the monk who was fighting with Zargan. Every move he made was powerful enough to shake the earth. He was a little surprised. A monk with a profession level of 40 or higher? I didn't expect to see it here. He turned around and smiled at Cicada, then said, "It seems that you are in trouble. But since you are my chosen, I will lend you a helping hand." A golden beam of light fell from the sky. Soren's figure walked out of the fog and gradually became solid. At this time, the Cloud Monk and the Eastern Princess who were fighting discovered his existence. Shadow Master. God. In the distant outer islands, the great temple of Motor City suddenly shone with golden light, and then countless divine power gathered and rose into a beam of light. Everyone looked at it and then murmured, "God's descent?" The surging divine power gathered. Soren's figure walked out of the fog, and his body gradually gathered into a solid body. A divine pressure instantly shrouded the battlefield. "Come." Soren smiled at Cicada in front of him and said, "Lend me your body." Cicada stood up involuntarily, then looked at Soren nervously. The next moment, Soren's golden body gradually merged into her body. A golden divine light appeared in Cicada's eyes, and then she seemed to have broken through some kind of limit and stood directly on the altar. Chapter 1043. A god needed a carrier to descend. Soren could not bear the consumption of divine power, so he had to use Cicada's body in the next battle. However, in the process of descending, Cicada's consciousness would not disappear, but she would be controlled by Soren as a bystander. This was a rare experience that could let her touch the glory of divinity. Because Cicada was a legendary fist master, Soren did not use his curved sword this time. As the golden light gathered, a pair of special gloves appeared in Cicada's palm. It was an item directly made of divine power and was equivalent to a +3 divine artifact. Shadow Nadir. Cicada's figure disappeared in an instant and appeared on the right side of Zargan. After being possessed by Soren, her strength increased greatly and almost surpassed all the monks present. Rapid Strike. Epic divine power. As a god, Soren's knowledge was enough to support any class in battle. Zargan's armor was easily penetrated by Cicada's epic divine power as soon as they clashed. Along with Zargan's painful roar, Cicada quickly left bloody wounds on Zargan's body. This was the ability of the monk order. When they served a god, they could get the blessing of divine power. However, most of them were bestowed by divine power. Epic divine power could only be obtained by devout believers above the legendary level. Penetrating Force. Penetrating Shock Palm. Shadow Strike. The power of shadow gathered on Cicada's gloves. When it hit the enemy in front of her, the surging power of shadow and the epic divine power eroded and broke through the ancient evil's defense. In the case of descending, Soren could mobilize Cicada's ability and his own divine power. Shadow Realm. Killing Realm. Death Realm. Some kind of powerful realm blocked the surrounding space. As if sensing the danger of Cicada, Zargan waved more than a dozen tentacles to wrap around her. Sunburst. At this time the Cloud Monk also reacted. With the vibration of chi, he tried to block the ancient evil in front of him and help Cicada to kill it. Shadow Dance. The Eastern Empress figure turned into more than 10 afterimages. A strange dagger with divine light flowing around it slashed towards the tentacle in front of her. She seemed to want to save Cicada because that was how Cicada was injured. If it wasn't for Soren's arrival, it would have died. Shadow Leap. However, Cicada didn't seem to care about the tentacles' attacks. The moment the tentacles touched her, Cicada's figure disappeared. The next moment, the cicada appeared behind the ancient evil creature and launched a series of rapid attacks. Zargan's body was badly damaged, but at the same time, it was regenerating at a speed visible to the naked eye. Ancient evil creatures had a terrifying regenerative ability. Even the gods could not easily kill them. Looks like there's still a little trouble. The cicada made a sound, but it was Soren's voice. She suddenly disappeared and reappeared above Zargan. Divine shockwave. A huge amount of divine power came out with Cicada's punch. The next moment, Zargan's body gradually became bloody. More importantly, under the effect of the divine shockwave, the altar under Zargan's feet was shattering. The power of the blood sacrifice was disappearing. It was obvious that Zargan's regeneration speed had slowed down. God's descent. Cicada took a deep breath, then put her palms together. Her whole body was shrouded in golden light. She completely ignored the evil aura of the ancient evil creature, as well as all the negative statuses and corrosive effects. She rushed directly to the ancient evil creature and threw a punch. With the golden light, she directly penetrated the body of the ancient evil creature. Space change. The surrounding space was distorted, and the power of the law cut around, directly cutting off Zargan's tentacles. Destructive strike. The divine power exploded with Cicada's fist as the center, directly destroying Zargan's body. All the flesh and blood were torn apart, leaving only the last strange horn. Even Asmodeus, the Lord of Hell, could not destroy this horn. In the end he could only seal it. Let me deal with it. Seeing that the cloud monk seemed to be preparing to seal the horn in front of him, Cicada suddenly said, I have a way to kill him completely. Death, divinity. Soren's golden body appeared. At this moment Cicada seemed to have become him. He reached out and held the strange horn in front of him, and then turned into a golden giant hundreds of feet tall. Divine form. Soren's pupils appeared dark, and then he suddenly clenched the horn in his hand. Death's hand. The surging divine power of death gathered. Under the terrible impact of Soren's divine power, a crack gradually appeared on the strange horn in front of him. Then more and more cracks appeared on the surface of the horn. Finally, some kind of unwilling and fearful roar sounded. A twisted soul broke free from it, as if it wanted to escape into the underworld. Soul imprisonment. Soren's mouth showed a sarcastic smile. With a wave of his hand, the twisted soul was imprisoned and finally injected into a gem made of divine power. The golden light dissipated. Cicada's figure slowly floated down from the sky, and Soren's golden body gradually faded away, along with the soul gem. Lord of Shadows? The expression of the Eastern princess was a little hesitant. She hesitated for a moment before whispering. Cicada opened his eyes at this time and said slowly, Master has left. At the same time, in the sky above the city of Moder, the golden light column gradually dissipated, and Soren's figure appeared inside the temple. During the Avatar crisis, every god's descent consumed a lot of divine power. Under normal circumstances, gods rarely descended. It was precisely because this action consumed too much power. At this time, the light gathered on the great temple had become dim. Soren had almost consumed the power that he had accumulated for nearly 3 months. However, Soren looked at the soul gem in front of him and said playfully, It looks like a good harvest. Crack. Just now, Soren did not completely kill Zargan. He only destroyed the horn where the soul lived. At this moment, when he crushed the soul gem, the power of the temple began to gather. Suppress. Some kind of terrible scream sounded, and then countless souls flew out from Soren's palm. These were the souls that were devoured by ancient evils. They were extremely evil existences. The gods hated them very much, and one of their abilities was to devour souls. Gate of the Kingdom of God. Soren waved his hand and opened a white light gate. Then, under the influence of divine power, countless souls flew into it and were directly thrown into the pool of shadow reincarnation. Zargan was completely killed at this time. Soren crushed his soul and transferred the souls he devoured into the Kingdom of God. A row of data appeared. You've killed the ancient evil, Zargan. Extracting the target's soul energy. You've gained 3950,000 slaughter EXP. The target has divine power. Extracting the target's divine power. You've gained 22 divinity. Your evil domain has been strengthened. Your order domain has been strengthened. Your crafty domain has been strengthened. A wave of divinity was devoured by Soren. After a while, he opened his eyes and was a little disappointed. There really is no divinity in the ancient evil. This was obvious. Because if there was a divinity, the ancient evil would have become a terrible evil god. But fortunately, Zargan's body was unexpectedly strengthened by the crafty domain. It seemed that his horn could not be destroyed because of the strange, crafty. In the deepest part of the Bator Inferno. Just when Soren completely destroyed Zargan's horn, an ancient existence seemed to have sensed something and opened his eyes. Is he finally dead? The Lord of Hell, Asmodeus, was a creature with dark skin and hair. He had a handsome appearance, blood-red pupils, and a pair of small dark red horns on his head. Asmodeus was dressed in gorgeous clothes, mainly in red and black. He held a strange ruby scepter in his hand, and powerful magic power gathered in it. He once killed Zargan in the process of conquering Hell, but there was no way to completely kill him. When Zargan was resurrected, the gods had no choice but to take action again. But now it seemed that Zargan was really dead, because Asmodeus could not feel the existence of Zargan's soul. This soul was sealed by him, but now it had completely disappeared. Shadow Master? The Lord of Hell murmured in a low voice, then slowly said, "The new child of destiny? What will you do in the end? Will it be another Cyric? Or will it be a surprise for me?" Everything returned to darkness. The Lord of Hell did not have much of a reaction to the fact that Soren killed Zargan. When Cyric stole the power of the three death gods and almost surpassed the gods, the Lord of Hell only watched silently. The Lord of Hell was very patient. In his long years he had seen too many people who suddenly rose up. Cyric was a typical example, but his end was not good. Before everything was settled, no one knew what kind of path Soren would take. The gods were quietly watching him. Because of Cyric's example, no one wanted to be the first to act. They were just curious whether Soren would end up like Cyric. For the gods, waiting was nothing. Only the one who had the last laugh would be the winner, and Cyric was undoubtedly not the one who had the last laugh. Some of them thought that Soren would be the same. When Cyric had just become a god, he was so vicious and ruthless. He killed several gods in one breath and almost surpassed the gods. But in the end he was too arrogant and destroyed himself. If Cyric had been a little smarter back then, he wouldn't have become the king of the dead, Kalemver. Some of the hostile gods were waiting for Soren to self-destruct like Cyric. Chapter 1044. Even though Soren had already left. However, the others still looked at Cicada with a hint of awe. This was the power of a true god. It was so easy to kill the ancient evil that they regarded as their greatest enemy. In fact, the gap between the ancient evil and the gods wasn't that big. However, Soren was now an intermediate divine power, which could be said to be very close to becoming a great divine power. This was equivalent to the main god of a divine system personally taking action. His combat power naturally couldn't be compared to those weak gods. Although the Cloud Monk was very powerful and was already at the top of the mortals, he also had a limitation. That was, he was still immortal. If the damage that the Cloud Monk caused to the ancient evil was ordinary damage, then the damage that Soren caused to the ancient evil was holy damage. This was the most fundamental difference. The power of the gods was much more important than the power of mortals in all aspects. After the ancient evil was killed by Soren, the evil aura that shrouded here gradually dissipated. The monks began to clean up the battlefield. The Cloud Monk didn't seem to want to communicate with others at all. He directly left by himself. However, just as Cicada was about to leave, the Eastern Empress suddenly walked to her side and said in a friendly manner, "This place is still very far from the monastery. Why don't you go to our camp in front to rest first?" If Cicada was just an ordinary fist master, the Eastern Empress naturally wouldn't deliberately make friends with her. However, if Cicada had Soren behind her, then the situation would be completely different. After seeing Soren arrive and kill the ancient evil in front of her, the Eastern Empress had a deeper understanding of Soren's strength. It was obvious that she planned to make friends with Cicada to ease their relationship and find a way to connect with Soren. Cicada originally wanted to refuse, but suddenly remembered the task that Soren gave her before he left. In the end, she nodded her head. A warrior monk sect. For a girl with almost no experience, it was indeed not easy. Perhaps she could try to borrow the power of the Eastern Empress. Motor City. After killing the ancient demon, Soren had used up a lot of his divine power. But the harvest was not small. Now, his strength had accumulated to a critical point. As long as he broke through the last little limit of divinity, he could directly be promoted to a great divine power. Now Soren's stats had changed. Name, Soren, Saint form, intermediate divine power. Race, half-elf, divine son of massacre. Attributes, strength 24, agility 44, constitution 30, intelligence 31, wisdom 22, charm 26. Alignment, lawful evil profession. Level 15 rogue 035500000, level 10 shadow dancer, max. Level 10 wizard 054250000, level 18 arcanist 062500000, grade 8. Health points, 925925, robust, EXP, 6305075 slaughter EXP, 35,545 profession EXP, unassigned. Skill points, none attribute points, none legend, 350. Divinity, 410, Great Divinity. Requires 900 points to upgrade, Great Divinity. Divinity, 270, Intermediate Divinity. Requires 300 points to upgrade, Great Divinity. Divine Power, 3513540. Requires 1200 Divine Power to upgrade to Great Divine Power. Master, God's Law. The current storage limit of the divinity is 5,400 points. Clergy, Death, Shadow, Theft, Half-Elf, Rogue, Tracking Domain. Order, Mage, Magic, Tyranny, Strife, Mage, Disease, Poison, Trickery, Slaughter, Death, Fear, Evil, Domination, Piracy, Shadow, Flora Spiritual Energy. Evil Spiritual Energy, Fear Spiritual Energy Status. Normal Basic Skills. Sneak 695, Literacy 585, Steal 625, Picklock 575, Snare 515, Focus 525, Negotiate 625, Appraise 525, Deceive 525, Intimidation 695, Taunt 455, Perform 475, Listen 585, Dodge 625, Parry 485, Block 475, Heal 475, Search 575, Detect 655, Copy Scroll 425, Spell Identify 515, Survival 455, Use Magic Equipment 475, Cooking 325, Alchemy 585, Forge Magic Weapon 475. Saint Form, Transcendence, Spell Immunity 1 to 4, Epic Divine Power, Instant Cast 1 to 6. Divinity Immunity, Acid, Electricity, Fire, Instant Death, Energy Drain. Divinity Abilities, Space Change, Size Change, Death's Hand, Reality Change, Form Change, Divine Shield, Area Divine Shield, Divine Shockwave, Area Divine Shockwave, Language Proficiency, Character Proficiency, Interplanar Communication, Astral Teleportation, Planar Teleportation. Avatar, Destructive Strike, Create Magic Item, Create Advanced Magic Item, Divine Power Acceleration, Divine Power Creation, Divine Power Spell Specialization, Divine Power Spell Resistance, Divine Power Spell Penetration, Automatic Arcane Casting, Absolute First Strike. Legendary Skills, Legendary Spell Maximization, Epic Mana, Legendary Instant Cast, Legendary Mana Construct, Legendary Tenacity, Legendary Spell Penetration, Legendary Reflex, See Weakness, Perfect Dual Wielding, Omnipotent Hands, Legendary Evasion, Legendary Battle Techniques, Epic Dexterity, Epic Intelligence, Epic Constitution. Special Abilities, Blessing of the Goddess of Magic, God Slayer, Blessing of the Misfortune Goddess, Blessing of the Sea Goddess, Dragon Blood Baptism LV2, Heart of Slaughter, Slayer, Death Walker, Ascetic, Erudite, Blasphemy. Personal Abilities, Nimble Left Hand, Eidetic Memory, Perseverance, Encyclopedic Knowledge, Skilled Spellcasting, Reflex Evasion, Intuitive Evasion, Roll Evasion, Agile Movement, Evade Sight, Dark Vision, Combat Spellcasting, Mobile Spellcasting, Spell Control, Empower Spell, Maximization, Magic Equipment Crafting, Spell Penetration, Advanced Magic Resistance, Advanced Cold Resistance, Advanced Fire Resistance, Advanced Poison Resistance, Advanced Lightning Resistance, Robust, Advanced. Regeneration 100 feet Telepathy. Profession Abilities, Arcane Memory, Arcane Counterspell, Arcane Runes, Shadow Dominator, Nimble Mind, Military Weapon Proficiency, Curved Sword Legendary. Battle Skills, Summon Shadow, Shadow Jump, 500 meters. Shadow Strike, Shadow Jump, Vampiric Touch, Divinity, Sword form, 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 spinning slash. Inside the temple, Soren sat on the throne and thought. He murmured, only 30 divinity points left. As long as I break through to the level of great divine power, there will be no more obstacles to establishing a divine system. But where should I get these 30 divinity points from? Divinity points. Generally speaking, only true gods had a lot of divinity points. Demigods could only get a pitiful amount of divinity points. Weak divine powers could basically be ruled out. In order for Soren to get 30 divinity points, he would need to kill at least 3 to 5 weak divine powers. This was very likely to offend too many divine systems. There were not many weak divine powers that could be killed at the moment. If it were weak divine powers, Soren would need around 2 targets. The best choice would be intermediate divine power. This could satisfy Soren's needs in one go and directly promote him to a great divine power. Who else can be a target? Soren pondered, constantly recalling the fallen gods in his memory. However, just as Soren was trying to find a new target, a message suddenly came from the bottomless abyss. The third layer of the bottomless abyss, the Forgotten Land. In the magnificent palace of the demon lord Sauron, a gorgeously dressed Yugoloth quickly walked in. He then carefully said, "Great Lord Sauron. Recently, my caravan has discovered something strange. I think I should tell you." Yugoloths were merchants of the bottomless abyss. They traded with devils and demons. Because they were good at traveling in the river Styx, this race of demons could be found all over the lower plains. On the blazing flame throne, the Baelor demon Lord Sauron opened his eyes and said in a deep voice, "What is it?" The Yugoloth carefully said, "Our caravan has recently discovered that Orcus's undead army has been mobilized on a large scale. A part of the Abyssal army has already set up camp in the south of the Rift Plains, but they have no intention of fighting with the devils. It seems that they intend to invade other planes, most likely material planes. This may be an opportunity." At this point, the Yugoloth carefully raised his head to observe Sauron's expression. If Orcus were to attack other planes, the internal defenses would be weak and empty. If the demon lord in front of him was bold enough, he might be able to seize the opportunity and replace Orcus as one of the abyssal giants. Sauron frowned and said to himself, "Attack a material plane?" The undead calamity has already broken out. Where is Orcus mobilizing his army to attack? Demons could not casually enter other planes. The lower the level of the demons, the closer they had to be to the rift planes to pass through. The Yugoloth brought a piece of news that Sauron did not expect. Could it be that Naruto has a new conspiracy? The current Orcus had already become a puppet. The resurrected Orcus was no longer the Orcus of the past. He was only a tool of the undead lords. It can't be the south coast, right? Sauron seemed to have thought of something, and his heart suddenly skipped a beat. The material planes were severely damaged by the undead calamity. Only the south coast was relatively intact under the protection of Sauron. There were not many places where Orcus could mobilize his army. Either he intended to provoke the core territories of the other gods, or only the south could satisfy his desire for slaughter and destruction. Send someone to investigate immediately. Sauron ordered the succubus beside him, then said, "You have done a good job. Go down and receive your reward." After that, Sauron's figure disappeared on the spot. The next moment he directly appeared in the lava pool. "Gather a team of Balrogs." Sauron thought for a moment, then said, "Follow me to sneak into Orcus territory to take a look. There must be something wrong with him suddenly mobilizing his army at this time." The Ghoul King had been subdued by Orcus again. If such a large undead army really wanted to attack a material plane, there were not many targets to choose from. Even Mordor City could be a potential target of Orcus. Sauron had to be careful. Chapter 1045. The unusual movements of Orcus's army made Sauron feel vigilant and uneasy. Although Orcus's strength had been greatly reduced, he was still one of the former 3 giants of the abyss. No matter how weak he was, a starving camel was still bigger than a horse. He was still much stronger than the other demon lords. Of the former 3 giants of the abyss, only Orcus was still alive. There was no need to mention the demon prince, Demogorgon. If it wasn't for his own crazy plan, the most powerful demon wouldn't have fallen so easily. However, although Demogorgon was dead, the 88th floor of the abyss was still controlled by the demons under his command. These demons believed that one day Demogorgon would be resurrected, and what they had to do now was to wait for the return of the demon prince. The second was the famous six-fingered sovereign of darkness, Glast. His fall was entirely due to his own death, and there was almost no possibility of resurrection. Glast, the sovereign of darkness, had been called six-fingered by the adventurers because he had 6 fingers. He had countless crazy plans and he was the most ambitious demon lord. However, there was only one thing he was famous for so far. That was, during the last time of troubles, he imprisoned the former goddess of wealth, Joaquin. In order to escape the disaster of the time of troubles, the first goddess of wealth tried to bribe the sovereign of darkness, Glast, and return to her own kingdom through his territory. However, when the goddess of wealth arrived at the territory of the sovereign of darkness, Glast, the giant of the abyss, did not hesitate to tear up the contract and imprison the goddess of wealth in his territory. This was a long period of imprisonment. Not only did the former goddess of wealth lose a lot of divine power and believers, but she also suffered countless terrible humiliations. It was not until 1371 that the goddess of wealth was rescued by a team of adventurers. However, at that time, her strength had been greatly weakened. This matter was an indescribable humiliation to the gods. Therefore, when the arcane empire rose and trade and wealth regained their dominance, the former goddess of wealth launched an extremely crazy revenge on the sovereign of darkness, Glast. Glast, the sovereign of darkness, had fallen at that time. There was no way to record the details of the war, because the destruction of the arcane empire also took away the first goddess of wealth. The current goddess of wealth was a gold member at that time. It was said that she was the carrier of the resurrection of the goddess of wealth. Nobody cared about this. Perhaps the current goddess of wealth still retained the memories of the previous goddess of wealth, but whether or not she was the current goddess of wealth, nobody cared. Orcus was the abyss giant who had died the most times, but he was also the one who had resurrected the most times. Currently, the plane he controlled was the 113th floor of the abyss, Thanatos. This level was unusually cold. It was filled with ice, thin air, and a sky filled with gloomy moonlight. This floor belongs to both the Tanakiri and the undead. In fact, this floor has a slight negative energy predominance. Even so, the purgatory moss and mushrooms still grew at the edge of the frozen soil. Various types of tombstones, imaginable and unimaginable, adorned the frozen landscape. Some stood alone, while others were randomly gathered together. It was like a small graveyard. The undead were everywhere, including demon-hunting spiders, vampire giants, and all kinds of liches. Most of the ordinary soldiers were zombies, ghouls, undead demons, and other zombies that followed the darkness. Orcus had the largest undead army in the abyss. The 3rd floor of the abyss. Orcus' movement of the army could not be hidden from others. The demons active in the upper levels of the abyss immediately discovered it and reported it to Sauron. After the hundreds of thousands of undead army entered the 1st floor of the abyss, they did not join the blood war. Instead, they approached the plain door that left the abyss. This matter was too strange. Basically, anyone could sense that something was wrong. Sauron was also vigilant. Therefore, he could not sit still and wait for death. He had to take the initiative to attack and see what Orcus' plan was. Therefore, he sent out the assassins under his command to follow the route of the river Styx to the 1st floor of the abyss. At the same time, he disguised himself as a Vrock and quietly approached the 113th floor of the abyss. This was an unusually cold plane. Basically, most demons did not like this place because the temperature was too low. The air was thin and visible to the naked eye was ice. This was the kingdom of the undead and also the paradise of the undead. As soon as he arrived, Sauron, who was disguised as a Vrock, encountered a group of zombies. They did not attack Sauron. Instead, they quickly surrounded him. Then a seemingly intelligent high-level ghoul walked out and said to Sauron, "Vrock? You have been recruited by the great ghoul king Dor-Isen. The even greater undead king Orcus needs to expand his army. Are you going to follow us? Or are you going to feed these zombies?" The demon's threats were always so straightforward. Sauron's acting skills were very good. He showed a hint of nervousness and uneasiness. Then he said, "Recruited? Are you going to join the blood war in the abyss? If it's a blood war, I'd rather fight than go, because no one can come back alive." The abyss was famous for its blood war and almost no one could come back alive. The high-level ghoul thought for a moment and said, "Of course not. Our goal is the material plane. Do you know? A rich material plane. You can destroy and kill as you wish, and not fight against those damn demons." In the abyss, most creatures thought that the blood war was a terrible meat grinder. Sauron immediately said, "If that's the case, I can join you." Most of the demons in the bottomless abyss were filled with desire for the material plane. It was like a playground. The zombies around them parted to form a path. Then the high-level ghoul said, "Then come with me. There's a portal opened by a lich in front. We can enter the army camp and directly teleport to the rift plains." The abyss was a land of chaos. There was no reason to recruit an army here. Even Sauron's demon army, except for the core part, most of them were recruited from the wilderness. Demons changed their camps very quickly. They obeyed powerful leaders. As long as they were strong enough, even spies sent by the enemy would quickly become loyal servants. For example, the succubus maids around Sauron. They were even willing to let Sauron plant a soul imprint on them. They also told Sauron that they were sent to spy on him. But betrayal was too easy for demons. Chapter 1046. The group crossed the cold wasteland. As a huge steel fortress appeared in front of them, countless undead appeared in front of Sauron's eyes. The number was much larger than he had imagined. There were hundreds of thousands of zombies, skeletons, ghouls, and undead demons gathered in the periphery. There were many necromancers and liches inside. Even though Orcus had fallen for so long, the undead army was still terrifying. This did not include the demon army that had been teleported to the first layer of the rift plane. A huge undead army was gathered in front of him, and there were also some 5-meter-tall giants walking around. These were vampiric giants, servants of the demons. They used to live in Laterre, but now they were probably summoned by Orcus. There were about 500 to 600 demon-hunting spiders. These terrifying creatures would occasionally kill 1 or 2 zombies, but most of the time they would just stay quietly. Only the Lord of the Abyss could do this. Without the pressure of the Lord of the Abyss, these terrifying creatures would attack any undead or demons. Ghouls were the main force of the undead army, making up about half of them. Is the king of ghouls, Dorison, here? Zorro thought to himself, the ghoul king Dorison is Orcus's warlord. If Orcus returns, he will definitely return to Orcus's side. Seems like the ghouls of the 421st layer of the abyss have also gathered. The mighty undead army gathered here, but most of the low-grade undead could not pass through the river Styx. They could only leave this plane through the teleportation circle. The demon and undead camps were separated. After Sauron arrived, a high-grade undead demon immediately walked over and looked at him. Vrock arranged for him to go to the south camp. Orcus was the Lord of the Abyss. Other than the undead, there was also a powerful demon army under his command. The Lord of the Abyss used the most violent method to recruit troops. Sauron had just approached the camp when he saw a large number of Hezru and Berserk demons. There were not many high-grade demons because many Balers did not like to stay with the undead. You will stay here from now on. A Glabriza demon took over Sauron and arranged for him to stay. It was a small space. In order to provide for these demons, the castle transported a large number of supplies, mainly food. The food was driven by the Anababas. Countless abyssal worms with human faces were driven to the vicinity of the camp and then distributed to the demons. Souls were both currency and food in the abyss. Demons loved worms the most, but most of them were scattered in the wilderness. No demons dared to approach the blood pool. The main reason was that the mother of worms was too powerful and did not allow other demons to approach the blood pool. Even the Balers did not dare to provoke the mother of worms that guarded the blood pool. Only intermediate demons were qualified to enjoy such food. And when the abyssal worms were delivered, there was almost no principle of fair distribution. First, the higher demons took some of them. Then the middle-ranked demons swarmed up to snatch them. The Hezru snatched most of the worms and chewed them. The slightly weaker demons could only snatch 1 or 2 worms, and there were almost none weaker than that. The low-level demons could only stand aside and watch them chew pitifully. These demons could only eat carrion and bones. The ground was full of blood, and the whole camp echoed with the sharp screams of the abyssal worms. The process of eating soon ended. Under the pressure of the demon lord, most of the demons returned to the camp. Such supplies were mostly provided once a day. The abyssal worms could greatly satisfy the demons' needs, and the low-level demons were completely cannon fodder. As long as they did not starve to death, it was fine. The ones in charge of supervising the demons were the Death Knights, human warriors that Orcus directly resurrected with the power of the scepter. Under the rule of authority and power, the entire fortress maintained basic order. Every time the teleportation gate opened, a batch of demons and undead would be sent away. Sauron played his role very well. Unfortunately, he did not snatch any abyssal worms, but no one cared about this. Demons who were not strong enough did not deserve to have food. Night fell. In the harsh cold, most of the demons returned to the camp. The low-level dretches crowded together like a group of goblins gathering together to keep warm in winter. Sauron's figure quietly left the camp. He escaped into the night, bypassed the sentry post of the Death Knights, and then approached the core area of the fortress. A huge portal appeared in front of him. This was a portal built by a lich. Its main structure was made of bones. Countless bones formed a grand portal that was 15 meters wide and 30 meters tall. There were many huge monsters in the abyss. If the portal was too small, the efficiency would be very low. Because it had been maintained for a day, a group of high-grade necromancers were charging the portal. Because this was the 113th floor of the abyss, which was the territory of Orcus, the portal was not strictly guarded. There were only some death knights and high-grade undead monsters. I can't let them teleport anymore. Sauron's heart skipped a beat. He looked at the vampire giants and countless undead monsters in the distance and quietly approached the portal. Orcus has at least 2 planes that can be mobilized, the 113th floor of the abyss and the 421st floor of the abyss. That is, if the portal is maintained. I'm afraid that the whole population of the south coast will not be as many as these undead and demons. How many troops could be mobilized in the 2 planes of the abyss? The number would be at least more than 1 million. If they really attacked the material plane, such a huge army would be completely wiped out in the south. I must destroy the portal. It was not easy to build such a huge portal. Sauron did not need to completely stop the other side even if it was just a week or 2. The portal was a very delicate thing. Once it was damaged, it would take at least half a month to rebuild. This time was enough for him to prepare and even inform the other gods. If the other gods did not help in this matter, everyone's believers would be finished together. Balor leader form. With a raging fire, Sauron's figure instantly turned into his original form. The terrible fire spread within a radius of 100 meters. Die. Worm. Sauron's first target was the demon-hunting spider in charge of guarding. Then his huge body flapped his demonic wings and rose into the air. He waved his sword mixed with destructive matter and slashed at the Death Knight next to him. This giant sword weighed nearly a ton, and under Sauron's terrible strength, it directly cut the enemy in half. Flame Whip. The flame whip of more than 50 meters long was thrown out and wrapped around the 3 necromancers in front of him, then quickly burned them to ashes. Fall. Sauron was now nearly 7 or 8 meters tall and weighed more than 8,000 pounds. His strength had reached more than 40 points, so he used the most violent way to tear down the portal in front of him, which was to directly crash into it. Chapter 1047. Boom. The whole ground shook violently. Sauron's Balor form directly caused cracks to appear on the portal, and then the light gathered on it quickly dissipated. The whole portal had been damaged. But this was not enough. Sauron suddenly clenched the giant beheading sword with both hands and directly slashed it with a 360-degree rotation. Whirlwind slash. Super fierce attack. With a fierce slash, Sauron directly cut off the huge white bone portal in front of him. Then there was a rumbling sound and the portal in front of him quickly collapsed. Greater teleportation. Sauron, who had succeeded, did not stop at all and immediately used greater teleportation to leave. This was the base camp of the undead. If he was stopped, he might not be able to escape. When Sauron's huge body left, there was suddenly an angry roar from the fortress in the distance, and then the figure of the Ghoul King, Dorison, quickly appeared in front of him. Everything around was filled with fire. Sauron's fire was fierce even in the cold climate, and there was no way to extinguish it. The pupils of the Ghoul King, Dorison, shone with pale green light. He was wearing a luxurious robe and leather armor, wearing a white bone crown, and holding a spine-shaped staff called the Hunger Staff. There was a skull on the top of the staff which was a tribute to Orcus. Dorison, who was endlessly hungry, had a great affinity for all creatures that were endlessly hungry. He looked like an extremely thin and dirty ghoul. His eyes flashed with a strong green ghoul light, and his feet were like the hooves of a demon. In sharp contrast to his dirty appearance, he was wearing a soft and gorgeous white robe made of human skin and a pale leather armor inlaid with many small skulls. Ghouls were the main believers of Dorison, and his holy emblem was a ghoul skull. This was a powerful enemy. The Ghoul King Dorison had the power of a true god. At his peak, he had reached the level of lesser divine power, and now he was probably above lesser divine power. His clergy was ghoul and necromancy, and his domains were chaos, evil, hunger, illusion, and craftiness. Because of the ghoul race, he was a god and a demon lord at the same time. However, because he was not a pure god and ghouls did not have much wisdom, Dorison was not seriously affected by the avatar crisis like other gods. He was still a demon lord. Compared to a true god, he was at best a demigod. He had almost no church, and his doctrine was purely about eating to satisfy his endless hunger. Damned Baelor. The king of ghouls, Dorison, did not see Sauron's appearance clearly. He only felt the residual aura of the Baelor. He roared angrily and hit the ground with his scepter and said, "You bunch of trash." He actually allowed a Baelor to destroy our master's important teleportation gate. There was no portal. No one could easily leave the abyss because the Styx was a place that even demons could easily cross, and the evil ships could not transport so many troops. The 113th floor of the abyss. Border. After confirming that the ghoul king, Dorison, did not pursue him, Sauron calmly returned to his territory. This was the disadvantage of demons. They were chaotic and difficult to command. If the ghoul king pursued him, there would be internal strife among the undead and demons. There were not many high-level undead with wisdom among the undead, and there were not many demons with brains. Under the chaotic nature, a slight collision would lead to a big fight. Anyway, it was okay to fight and maybe he could even level up. Demons were like this. They were very thirsty for soul power, even if they could automatically level up after devouring the power of the undead. The rules of the bottomless abyss were extremely chaotic. The Blood Wars could give the highest level of EXP rewards, but even without the Blood Wars, demons could still advance through slaughter. It seems that the south coast has to be prepared. Although the portal of Orcus was destroyed, the undead army that had been sent to the Rift Plain was still huge. If they launched an attack, it meant that humans would have to face a terrible army of hundreds of thousands. Such a force was definitely not something a country could resist because the undead in the abyss were generally more difficult to challenge. Even the zombies were tainted by the evil aura of the abyss, and they were at least 2 or 3 creature levels. In other words, the soldiers of ordinary towns with good equipment could only fight against 1 or 2 low-level undead at most. There was almost no way to fight against those powerful beings. Motor City. The message from the abyss made Soren's heart skip a beat. The south coast was so large that even if he sent out all his forces, he would not be able to defend it. With such a huge army of undead, they could only fight if they hit one place. Otherwise, they would only be defeated quickly. It seems that I have to ask Arendelle for help. Now that Soren had a close relationship with the Frost Kingdom, Princess Royal's attitude towards him was becoming more and more friendly. This kind of big thing could not be forced. If something went wrong, it would be a total collapse. So Soren did not hesitate to ask Arendelle for help. Not only did he ask for the help of the Ice Witches, but he also hoped that Princess Royal would support him. Communication with the gods was very simple. When Soren's message had just been sent to Arendelle, Princess Royal immediately agreed. "Let's do this." Princess Royal's voice was directly transmitted to Soren's mind through the temple, and slowly said, "Tomorrow there will be a group of ice witches teleported to Motor City. I will send a team of court mages to assist. If there is anything unusual, I will also come directly to Motor City." Arendelle and Motor City had a portal. Because it consumed too much power, only important people could be teleported. There were only 5 such portals, which were in Arendelle, the Northern Tower, the Wind Spear Hills, the City of Wealth, and Port Tylon. If the power of the Mies nucleus could be mobilized in the future, the number of portals should also be increased. However, it was impossible to rely solely on portals because it could not be done even during the Arcane Empire. Unless there was some kind of endless and extremely huge energy, and if there was such energy, it would be enough to make the civilization soar to the level of an interstellar civilization. Order the whole city to be on alert. Soren thought for a moment and ordered, "Put the entire south on level 1 alert. Recall all patrol fleets. Let the Legion camp near the city. Turn on the instant communication device. If there is any large-scale abnormality, immediately let the witches send a message to Motor City." The threat came from the undead. Then there was no need for the fleet at sea to be recalled to defend the city. The attack of the undead should not take too long. Chapter 1048. In a blink of an eye it was almost December. The arrival of winter did not make Mordor City cold. So far it was just a light snow. Under the influence of the enchantment that enveloped the entire city, the climate and environment were transformed to be more suitable for people to live in. Soren had been guarding against possible attacks on the south coast. But what he never expected was that the target of Orcus' attack was not the south coast, but Mordor City far away in the outer islands. Inside the arcane tower. When night gradually fell, suddenly a sharp alarm sounded. Alert! Alert! Abnormality detected. Abnormal spatial fluctuations detected 20 kilometers south of the arcane tower. Alert! Alert! An unknown spatial rift has appeared. Arcane tower entering level 1 state of preparation. Thalling sharp alarms sounded. Then in the next second, Soren, Gloria, Fallen Witch, Alice and Vivian were directly teleported to the top of the arcane tower. There was an independent teleportation beacon here to deal with possible emergencies. What's going on? Alice seemed to have just fallen asleep. She was still wearing pajamas and her beautiful figure was faintly visible. Gloria shook her head and said, "A sudden alarm. It seems that an unknown spatial rift has been discovered." After she said that, she reached out and touched the huge crystal ball, and then a projection appeared on it. The scene in the distance appeared in front of them. A dark red spatial door opened. The whole sky seemed to be torn open and then countless demons, wraiths, liches and so on rushed out. They arrived near the sixth town in the south, Black Mountain Town. In just a while demons rushed in and then there were sharp screams and alarms. The defenders of the town only resisted for less than 3 minutes before they were broken by a powerful 6-armed snake demon. Then it was a bloody massacre. These undead and demons had no mercy at all. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of people died under their butcher's knife. Countless demons and undead passed through the portal, and in the blink of an eye, nearly 10,000 enemies were teleported to the ground. At this time the alarm in Mordor City sounded, followed by the sound of the military camp quickly gathering. This reaction speed was already very fast, but it was still not as fast as the speed of the undead. It's Orcus's army? Soren's face turned pale. He never thought that Orcus would dare to attack the city of Mordor. This was like a slap to his face. Directly attacking a god's territory was the most serious form of provocation, and Orcus' actions had pushed Soren to the brink of death. Most of the people in the city of Mordor were Soren's followers, and it was also the core area of his foundation. Even if Soren won this battle he would have to pay a huge price. Enter full combat mode immediately. Soren directly took over the highest authority of the arcane tower. He glanced at the others and said, "Kalina, go and activate the elemental furnace and the Mies core. Gloria, activate the floating device. Prepare the arcane tower to take off. Thalling, activate the lock immediately. Activate the energy protection enchantment and bring Mordor City into the range of the energy protection enchantment. Alice, you go and activate all the golems. Remember, all the golems." Soren solemnly repeated, and then Alice nodded with a serious expression and directly teleported to the bottom of the arcane tower. Emergency combat mode. Emergency combat mode. The cold mechanical voice spread throughout the city of Mordor, and then it continued, "Mordor City has been attacked by demons. All combatants are to be on standby immediately. Ordinary people are to return to their residences immediately. Port Mordor garrison is to enter combat mode. Everyone is to assemble in the barracks immediately. Emergency combat mode. Emergency combat mode. The 1st to 7th city guards of Mordor are to assemble outside the barracks immediately. The 3rd to 5th priest regiment are to assemble outside the temple. All wizards with a profession level of 5 and above are to enter combat mode. Please gather near the library within 5 minutes. Dragon Knights are to take off and support the garrison in the southern cities. The 3rd and 6th fleets are to sail in the direction of the inland river. Rumble. With a slight battle on the ground, the arcane tower activated the floating device, and then directly suspended about 50 meters in the air. Then a red light appeared on the neat ground, and with the sound of mechanical activation, a secret door in the basement gradually appeared, and below it was a wide staircase. Buzz. The amethyst energy storage was activated to the limit in an instant, and then in the first wide basement, the golems that were neatly arranged in dense rows opened their eyes at the same time. The 1st Golem Legion is to enter combat mode. The 2nd Golem Legion is to enter combat mode. The Golem Auxiliary Legion is to enter combat mode. The Clay Golem Auxiliary Legion is to enter combat mode. The 3rd Steel Golem Legion is to enter combat mode. Activate the Diamond Golem Squad. Energy transmission. Boom. Heavy footsteps sounded crazily. Under the full operation of the Mies's energy core, a row of 5 golems with a total of 300 quickly walked out of the basement. Followed by the 2nd Golem Legion, the Golem Auxiliary Legion, and the Clay Golem Auxiliary Legion. In just 10 minutes, about 6,000 golems had completed the assembly, and then quickly walked out of Motor City. Since the establishment of Motor City, Soren had been stockpiling the number of golems. The current reserve had reached more than 10,000 golems, and now all the golems that had been activated had been equipped with the defense ability. Witches activate the portal. Soren's cold order sounded, activate the number 23 space waymark. Connect and lock. High Priest, prepare to teleport to the Archbishop. Activate the Diamond Golem emergency response device. Begin teleporting the number 1 Diamond Golem formation. Buzz. A door opened near the laboratory, and then 12 senior witches quickly arrived, and Saruman's figure soon appeared. A portal opened and connected to the nearest teleportation point of the demon army. As early as the 2nd transformation of Mordor City, Soren had set up teleportation beacons inside Mordor City in order to deal with possible sudden attacks. 10 activated diamond golems quickly appeared, and then stepped into the portal. Vivian Lillian, you go support the front line. Soren nodded, then pointed to the direction of the sea. In front of Port Motor, the surrounding seawater suddenly separated to the left and right, and then a dark mast broke through the waves, and then the ghost ship rushed out from the bottom of the sea. With the appearance of the magic light, the ghost ship directly floated in the air, and all the earthbound spirits automatically became busy, quickly turned the muzzle, and then flew toward the location of the demon army. Arcane Tower activated. Soren's figure turned into a golden shadow and then said, Super Magic Pulse Cannon charging. Coordinates 23:14. His god-level perception spread out. Soren instantly locked on to a group of liches and senior demons among the enemy, and said coldly, Start charging. Target locked. Super Magic Pulse Cannon ready to fire. Boom. The silver-white barrel quickly turned, and then it quickly charged at a speed that had never been seen before. Then an energy cannon directly crossed the air and hit a point 20 kilometers away in an instant. Rumble. There was a violent earthquake. Inside the demon army that suddenly appeared, about 50 meters were directly evaporated by the cannon, and glass-like crystals appeared on the ground. Except for a few liches that used accidental teleportation, the rest were completely evaporated. The 1st City Defense Force has been assembled. The 2nd City Defense Force has been assembled. The 3rd City Defense Force has been assembled. The drow officer gave the order without any expression, and then quickly gathered the troops and rushed toward the location of the battle. The location of Port Motor. All the naval fleets were in place, and under the command of the officer, they quickly set sail and approached the inland river. At this time, Soren's figure appeared in the temple, and then he said, Gloria, you take over the command of the Arcane Tower. Divine form. Countless divine powers gathered around the great temple gathered toward Soren's body, and then a golden giant appeared over the temple. Soren took a step and appeared more than 20 kilometers away, and then he slammed his fist on the ground. Area Divine Power Shock Wave *3. A surge of divine power swept across the area within a radius of 300 meters. Soren's domain blocked all teleportation spells, and then a large number of undead fell to the ground in batches. Even the powerful liches could only withstand the 3rd wave of Area Divine Power Shock Wave, and then their whole body turned into ashes like scattered bones. 3 Area Divine Power Shock Waves directly consumed a lot of Soren's divine power. However, it also stopped the enemy's attack in an instant. Soren's figure turned back into the form of a saint, and then he activated his divinity and directly entered the state of Avatar. The figure of the Arcane Tower appeared in the distance. The Quetzalcoatlus quickly rushed to the battlefield, blocking the attack of some flying demons, and at the same time covering the evacuation of the residents in the town. In just 10 minutes, 3 nearby towns had been attacked, and more than 5,000 civilians had died at the hands of the demons and the undead. The mighty army of the undead was still teleporting into the range of the island of Motor. In just a while, the core area occupied by the enemy had gathered more than 30,000 undead troops. Even Soren did not dare to go deep and use the power of divinity to close the portal here, because a powerful demon lord's breath covered this area. Orcus. One of the three giants of the abyss, the undead king, Orcus had come to Moder in person. Chapter 1049. Orcus. Its full name was Demon Monarch of Undead Creatures. When Soren saw the undead king, Orcus, in the distance, some information about him had already emerged in his mind. This was definitely a very difficult opponent to deal with. Name: Orcus, Undead Monarch, large otherworld creature, chaotic, evil, transdimensional, HP, 900 plus special attack. Command undead creatures, spell-like ability, spells, divine light of fear, poison, summon demon, undead creature summon, Orcus staff. Special feature: damage reduction 25 legendary, kindness and cold steel, night vision 60 feet, immunity to poison and lightning, cold, acid and fire resistance 10 each, otherworld creature trait, realm of God, dead talk, telepathy 100 feet. Attributes: strength 45, dexterity 22, vitality 33, intelligence 28, wisdom 28, charm 34. Skills: bluff 600, focus 590, negotiation 600, escape 240, gather information 490, intimidation 600, knowledge 570, listen 530, sneak 520, search 520, observation 500, spell identify 570, necromancy spells 590, detect 550, survival 570, in other planes 590. Specialties: blind fighting, cleave of momentum, combat casting, crafting magic wands, crafting wondrous items, strengthen spell effectiveness, powerful cleave of momentum, spell upgrade, proficient in preemptive attacks, multi-strike, violent attack, instant spell cast, legendary abilities, legendary spell casting, multi-strike, undead dominator, undead domain. Spells that can be cast at will: corpse manipulation, blasphemy, charm monster, abyssal darkness, blasphemy, detect kindness, detect magic, detect thoughts, fear, greater dispel magic, greater teleport, lightning beam, polymorph, read magic, suggestion, emblem of death, emblem of pain, clever speech, true knowledge, evil residence, evil divine light, evil shadow strike, firewall. Once a day, retarded spell. Orcus has a spellcaster level of 35. He can cast spells like a level 20 necromancer or level 15 priest. His restriction school is enchantment and illusion. His domain is death, destruction, and evil. Challenge level, 28+. As one of the three great lords of the abyss, Orcus had the power to challenge gods head-on. Even some of the weaker gods were no match for him, even in their true god form. This terrifying abyssal lord had 45 strength, which was the highest among all the demon lords. In other words, there were almost no creatures in the abyss that could compete with his power, and this power did not have any magic effect. The most common power he used was bull strength. He was one of the targets that the adventurers wanted to capture the most. Other than the abilities that Soren could recall, Orcus also had the abilities of a level 20 legendary necromancer, including but not limited to Meteor Blast, Banshee's Howl, Soul Bind, Wish, Energy Drain, and so on. Orcus could also cast the abilities of a priest up to the 9th circle, including Killing Spell, Lethal Spell, Chaos Mantra, and so on. His domains were death, destruction, and evil. It had special legendary spells such as Mummy's Dust, Collapse, Summon the Undead Army, and so on. In the meantime, Orcus also had Deity's Domain, which gave him omniscience, complete perception, domain knowledge, and other abilities. To put it simply, this domain was similar to Soren's ability in his true god form. This gave Orcus the power to challenge gods head-on and even kill them. But these were not the most frightening things about him. The most frightening thing about Orcus was his weapon, which was the legendary +5 artifact, Orcus Staff. This was a divine artifact that was given the power of death. It was not very powerful in terms of damage. It was just a huge black skeletal staff, but it was given an extremely frightening ability. Any living creature that came into contact with the Orcus staff would have to forcibly trigger a 40 test of death. This meant that any living creature that was weaker than this would be killed by this artifact. Under normal circumstances, only a level 20 pure-blooded warrior would have a 50% chance of being immune, and any living creature that was weaker than legendary would have a 90% chance of surviving. There was less than a 10% chance of being immune. Warning. This power would be triggered as soon as it was touched, which meant that if one was not able to resist the power of death, they would be killed instantly. Just as Soren was looking at Orcus in the distance, the Abyss Lord was also looking at Soren. Both sides felt great pressure. Soren was a mid-level god, and Orcus was the most powerful demon lord. Both sides had the ability to kill each other, but it was hard to say who would win. Attack. Orcus held a huge black skeletal staff and pointed forward. Then, behind the undead army, a few figures that were 5 or 6 meters tall appeared. Vampire giants. These giants that were turned into undead creatures by Orcus were also a huge threat in the abyss. For mortals they were legendary creatures. At the same time, some evil liches also appeared. They began to cast all kinds of spells to buff the undead knights. The undead army surged forward like a tide. The army from Moder was still on their way. 20 kilometers was not a short distance. Let's give up here. Gloria sighed and said, the golem army is still on their way. There is no way to defend this place. We can only retreat until the army arrives. The number of enemies was too great. In just a short while there were already 50 to 60,000 undead. The 3 towns in front of him had basically been destroyed. Except for the people who were evacuated by the Quetzalcoatlus Knights at the beginning, the others were basically surrounded by the undead and demons. There were shrill screams and wails in the distance. Soren watched his believers and subjects being slaughtered, and his eyes could not help but show a blood-red light. Nearly 10,000 people were slaughtered by the undead. The power of mortals was so weak that they could not resist the attack of the Abyss Lord. Retreat. Soren gritted his teeth and said. He could not fight against so many enemies in his saint form. Besides, Orcus could join forces with the legendary undead to kill him at any time. The diamond golems formed a defensive formation. The wyvern knights covered the surroundings and killed some flying demons that tried to chase after them. The scattered battles were still going on. More than 12,000 civilians were killed by the undead. Then, the necromancer used their bones to perform an evil sacrifice and summon more undead creatures. Behind Soren, the army of Moder had begun to appear. The priests from the church continued to bless the army with divine spells such as courage, protection, strength, and so on. With the sound of heavy footsteps, the golem legion began to appear in batches. Nearly 11,000 golems of various kinds quickly spread out on the battlefield and formed a steel wall in front of the front line. Activate the magic lock. Gloria's voice came from the top of the arcane tower. Then a large light curtain opened, and then a huge magic power shrouded the battlefield in front of them. The magic lock was the most terrible weapon on the battlefield. Since the Silver Age, the High Elves and human great arcanists had tried to build a magic lock for hundreds of years. A complete magic lock included the following abilities: permanent spells, instant large-scale spells, forbidden spells, area anti-magic field, activation spells, permanent effects, and so on. With the activation of the power of the Mies energy core, a cold mechanical voice sounded inside the arcane tower. Activate the permanent effect of the magic lock, negative energy protection barrier. Activate the super large enchantment spell, death protection barrier. What was the most terrible ability of the undead? It was not the means to resurrect and summon the undead, but the various negative energy and instant death spells of the high undead. Gloria activated a large protective negative energy barrier, and at the same time, activated the power of the anti-death barrier. Within the range of the magic lock, most of the instant death spells would lose their effect, unless the power was enough to break through the limit of the magic lock. In this case, one would need a casting level of at least 35 or above. At present, it seemed that only Orcus could do it among all the undead and demons in front of them. Shadow Realm. The gray shadow shrouded the space and Soren's figure appeared in mid-air. All the rogues who believed in and served him became hazy for a while. Under the blessing of Soren's Shadow Realm, their sneak and hiding ability gained an additional 50 points, and their evasion ability gained a hazy bonus of 10 points. There was no limit to the number of times they used shadow power. The shadow power mobilized by abilities such as Shadow Strike, Shadow Raid, and so on was directly provided by Soren. Order, Realm. Soren's divine power resisted Orcus's Realm of Chaos and offset all the negative effects it brought. Slaughter, Realm. Death Realm. Soren activated one realm after another. The Pirate Realm strengthened the morale of the army, the Fear Realm counteracted the fear aura of the High Undead, the Magic Realm strengthened the spellcaster's penetration, and the Slaughter and Death Realm suppressed the undead army in the distance. Gloria and Fallen, which appeared at the top of the arcane tower. Vivian and Lillian stood on the deck of the Dead Man's Voice. Alice appeared behind the Diamond Golem. Saruman's body was surrounded by twisted vines. The high priest stood silently behind Soren, and on the side was the bishops led by the divine priest Milan. The giant's burly figure was covered in plate armor, and behind him was a team of heavily armored warriors. The golem army opened a 3-kilometer-long defense line. In front of them, countless undead appeared from the portal in the distance. The demon army gathered on the left, and the undead army formed a battle formation on the right. The huge army of more than 200,000 almost filled the space in front of them. Orcus's figure was so conspicuous among the countless undead. As he clenched his scepter and pointed forward, the fully assembled enemies began to attack. Countless undead and demons rushed forward like a raging tide. This was the real Abyss army. Even in the Blood War, such an Abyss army was enough to fight against the elite demons. Chapter 1050. Although Soren had a huge force. But within the city of Mordor, there were not many troops that could be mobilized. Because even if the population of the entire island of Mordor was added together, it was only about 400,000 or 500,000 people. The proportion of the army in Mordor was about 1/10. There were about 30,000 regular troops in the inner city, 5,000 defenders in the port area, and the rest were fleets. At most, they would occasionally rest on the island of Mordor, and then there were a large number of militia troops in many towns. This number was relatively large, estimated to reach the scale of 60 to 70,000. However, the combat power of the militia was too low. At most, a militia could deal with 1 or 2 skeletons. When facing the real Abyss army, they could basically ignore them. If they went to the battlefield, they would be killed. In this way, Soren could actually gather very few troops in a short time. The city defense army could come one after another, about 20,000 people. There were about 2,000 or 3,000 people from the church, witches, and professions. The core force was still the Arcane Tower and the Golem army. Soren could not give up the outer towns to defend Mordor because there were at least 100,000 people in the outer 12 towns. If he gave them up and let them be slaughtered by the undead army, not only would Soren's strength be greatly reduced, but his prestige and faith would also be shaken in an instant. Therefore, in this case, Soren could only fight head-on. And he had to fight. When Orcus's undead army gathered and launched an attack, all the troops that Soren could mobilize in a short time were also concentrated in the plains. There were about 36,000 troops in Mordor. The number of Orcus's army was between 200,000 and 300,000. Nearly 10 times the number of troops gave great pressure, but the soldiers of Mordor did not retreat in the slightest, and even their morale was not shaken at all, because the true God was with them. The top combat power of Mordor was gathered together. There was also an arcane tower in the sky. The domain of the magic lock had also been activated. The mighty golems formed a line of defense. These powerful golems were not at a disadvantage even in the face of demons. Especially the large-scale steel golems, their combat power was enough to defeat all the blood army. Woo woo woo. The dull sound of a bugle horn was heard. Countless dretches were driven forward. Orcus was still using the same tactic as the Abyss, which was to use a large number of cannon fodders to consume the enemy's strength. Among the nearly 300,000 Abyssal army, there were about 50,000 low-level demons, followed by about 100,000 low-level undead. These were all cannon fodder that could be used at will. Even with numbers, they could still defeat a large number of enemies. More than once, the elite army of devils had been surrounded by 10 times the number of low-grade demons and died of exhaustion. Shield formation. The dull roar of the drow officer sounded, and then from the defense line of the city of Mordor, a team of warriors with full armor and giant metal shields walked out. There were also many Duergars among them. Despite their short stature, they were holding giant shields that were even larger and heavier than themselves. It was as if they didn't care at all. These Duergars were specially trained shield warriors. They were equipped with full-body armor, enchanted shields and one-handed war hammers. They were the strongest defensive force of the army, and they were responsible for resisting the frontline attacks. Boom, boom. The muffled sound of cannon fire was heard. The portal at the rear urgently mobilized a batch of cannons, and there was also long-range artillery support from the warships in the direction of the inland river. However, these were not the key factors that determined the outcome of the battle. Under Gloria's command, the witches worked together to cast their spells. Dense fireballs fell from the sky and bloomed on the map within a radius of 100 meters. Every time they cast a spell, they would take away thousands of demon cannon fodder. Nearly 100,000 cannon fodders gradually approached and quickly fell to the ground in the process. In just 5 or 6 rounds of attacks, 30 to 50,000 low-level demons and low-level undead had been destroyed. Orcus, who was in the rear, could not help but frown. The organizational ability and probability of the army of Mordor were completely beyond his imagination. It made him feel like he was fighting against the army of devils. Because in the bloody battle, the elite devils also ignored such a huge number and efficiently eliminated batch after batch of demon cannon fodders. The trial of Sauron's battle flag plane began to take effect. The main target of the trial was the demons, and most of the officers in Mordor had entered it, so when they really faced the demon army they did not panic at all. If the officers did not panic, the soldiers below would not panic. All orders were carried out in an orderly manner, and the enemy was quickly reduced under the attack. Clay golems enter combat state. The clay golems, which occupied the largest proportion of the city of Mordor, began to step forward. Nearly 6,000 clay golems and stone golems formed the first line of defense. When the 70 or 80,000 undead cannon fodders approached, the clay golems did not change at all. With 25 points of strength they directly crushed the enemy. At the moment of contact, 7 or 8,000 skeletons and dretches were smashed without hesitation. The ability, resist attack, was originally for defensive counterattack, and the effect was amazing against cannon fodders. And the most important point was that although the clay golems' combat power was close to the lowest among the golems, they had a very powerful ability. They had about 10 points of damage immunity, and they were very effective against sharp weapons. They could gradually recover their damage during the battle. Mordor did not make large and giant clay golems, which made them unable to fight against high-grade beings, but it was enough to crush these cannon fodders with numbers. Batches of demon cannon fodders fell down. The dretches were the first to be unable to bear it and began to collapse quickly. Even the demon generals could not stop them. There were 30 to 50,000 demon corpses at the front of the battle, but only 100 or 200 clay golems were destroyed. The skeletons and zombies were basically of little use, especially when facing the golems. They were difficult to break through. Earthquake. The ground began to shake violently. A small group of necromancers quietly approached under the leadership of the Lich, and then launched a large-scale earthquake. Then many clay golems began to crack. This spell caused high damage to the clay golems. However, they only had so many opportunities. At the moment when they were close to the battlefield and finished casting, these people were completely exposed. The Dark Blade assassins blessed by Sauron quickly dealt with them. The battlefield entered a war of attrition. The army of Mordor was on standby in the rear. The clay golems began to fight with the cannon fodders in front of them. Almost every time a clay golem was destroyed, the undead would have to pay 100 times the price. The basic cost of a clay golem was more than 3,600 gold coins. If it was sold on the market, the price would be about 15,000 gold coins. Requires casting a spell to activate. Sauron did not feel distressed at the moment. He watched the clay golems and the abyss cannon fodders in front of him without blinking. The main force basically stopped attacking. In this way, Sauron used nearly 1,800 clay golems to fight against nearly 100,000 undead cannon fodders. In his heart, he was already prepared to use Kindler to fight against the demons. Chapter 1051. Piles of bones and corpses piled up like mountains. The high-grade demons obviously did not expect the army of Mordor to be so resilient, and the successful cannon fodder could not break into the enemy's defense line. The war of attrition failed. This was a blow to the demons' morale because in every battle, they succeeded in using cannon fodder to kill part of the enemy's main force. But now the enemy in front of them had only consumed a part of the golems, and there were still many golems in the rear. If they wanted to completely defeat the enemy, they did not know how many people would die. Hezru attack. Skeletons attack. Orcus did not care about the consumption of more than 100,000 cannon fodder. He clenched his scepter and looked at Sauron, who was also motionless, and waved his hand to start the second round of attrition. In the bottomless abyss, even the middle-grade demons were also cannon fodder. They were just higher-grade cannon fodder. Orcus had plenty of cannon fodder, and he did not believe that the enemy in front of him could resist all the cannon fodder attacks. Ghouls, skeleton warriors and some undead knights joined the battlefield. On the other side were berserk demons and Hezru demons as the core cannon fodder of the bloody war. These creatures with amazing strength and huge size were enough to crush the enemy. Their tenacious vitality could break through any defense line. Brr. The Hezru demons roared again and again. In Soren's line of defense, many officers began to issue orders. After experiencing the battle flag trial, they knew very well that the Golem Legion alone could not stop all the Hezru. Steel golems enter combat mode. More heavy footsteps sounded, and steel golems appeared in front of the defense line. There were not many of them. Even in Mordor there were only about 1,600 of them, but their combat power was quite strong. Any steel golem alone was at the level of a mini-boss. Steel golems and golems mixed to form a defense line. At this moment, the Grey Dwarf Shield Warriors also joined the battle. They were scattered on both sides to cover. Some heavy armored warriors with swords in both hands spread out. Assassins and rogues escaped into the shadows, ready to destroy the demons that broke through the defense line. The Berserk demons and Hezru demons' charge was unstoppable. These terrible demons faced the Golem army of Motor City head-on, and they were not at a disadvantage at all. They crushed the clay golems at the front and were held back by the golems. A small number of them broke through the defense of the steel golems, but they soon encountered the stone-like shield warriors of the Grey Dwarves. Saruman, you may make your move now. The high priest's voice rang out. Then they saw Saruman scatter a field of sparkling and translucent crystals. These crystals scattered with the wind, and the plants on the ground grew wildly the moment they came into contact with them. Countless vines rose from the ground. A large-scale entanglement spell that enveloped the battlefield appeared. At the same time, the vines also had some terrifying characteristics. They could devour flesh and blood to strengthen themselves, quickly stopping the advance of the demon army. Demigod Saruman. The power of the legendary realm had finally made its move. This made one of the Balers restless, but when it saw Soren at the back, it obediently gave up on the idea. Only Orcus could fight against Soren. Everyone else would die if they encountered Soren. The Lich at the back did not move, and the demons did not dare to act rashly. The fierce battle was still going on. One by one, the golems fell to the ground under the attack of the demons, and some soldiers of Motor City began to fall. When the snake demons began to join the battlefield, the giant looked at the high priest in the distance. After getting her signal, he roared, and some heavily armored soldiers joined the battle under the lead of the giant. The anchor that weighed more than half a ton was swung by the giant. Even the Hezru demons would be half dead if they were hit by it. This new force quickly defeated the demons in front of them, and at the same time, stopped the snake demons outside the line of defense. The priests began to cast their divine spells. Because of the existence of Soren's domain, the number of divine spells they had was obviously more. Some healing spells kept appearing, and the number of casualties of the enemy was obviously much higher than that of Motor City. Balers, assassins, Glabrizu, six-armed snake demons. Some huge black shadows appeared in the sky. The Balers roared excitedly, opened their huge demon wings and launched an attack. However, at this moment, a high-pitched dragon roar sounded. An adult shadow dragon led the Quetzalcoatlus to fly towards these demons. Dragons were the overlords of the sky. Even the high-grade demons did not dare to fight with them in the air. The difference in size between the two sides was too big. Some reinforcements from the shadow plane had arrived. Soren also had some troops in the shadow plane, including an adult shadow dragon. Go! Vivian clapped her hands, and then a huge Quetzalcoatlus appeared. It was given divinity by Vivian, and it looked as big as an old dragon. There were screams in the sky, and demons fell one after another. Witches, get ready to fight. When the necromancers started casting their spells, the witches under Gloria's command also prepared for battle. The enemy's attack was getting fiercer and fiercer. Soren narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at Orcus behind him. He was waiting for the other side to make a move. It seemed that no one could stop Soren, and Soren also did not have many people who could fight against Orcus. Even Vivian and Lillian were in a bit of danger. Orcus did not move and Soren could not act rashly. Diamond Golems, attack. The core fighting force of Motor finally moved. Under the command of Gloria, more than 100 Diamond Golems appeared on the battlefield. Their huge size gave the demons a lot of pressure. These Diamond Golems were the strongest army that Soren had accumulated. There were countless diamonds that were smashed on them, and each Diamond Golem had legendary fighting strength. They pushed into the demon army, and only the high-grade demons could stop them. Orcus finally could not help it. The skeleton knights began to attack, the lich's figures were erratic, the vampire giants quickly charged, and the ancient mummies appeared one after another. The most powerful undead began to move. On the side of Motor, Gloria, Fallen Witch, Vivian, Alice, and others also began to move, casting spells on themselves. Only they could stop these terrible creatures. Orcus finally moved. He gripped the huge black skeletal staff tightly and stepped forward. Soren stared at him and his figure disappeared in an instant. There was a strange vacuum in the middle of the battlefield. Neither the army of Motor nor the army of the Abyss dared to get close because this was a battle between gods. Whether it was Soren or Orcus, they both had terrible power that could crush legendary legends. The cold wind whistled. The surrounding coldness seemed to be getting more and more obvious, and little crystal snowflakes fell from the sky. Chapter 1052. Orcus' figure looked huge and bloated. However, when Soren's figure suddenly appeared and slashed at Orcus with his curved sword, Orcus dodged with great agility. At the same time he swung the Orcus staff backhandedly and smashed it at Soren. Blind fight. Holy realm. Orcus, who was 6 or 7 meters tall and weighed more than 6,000 pounds, was agile beyond his size and managed to dodge Soren's sneak attack. God's descent. Golden light gathered around Soren's body. Facing Orcus, who had 45 points of strength, Soren did not have the confidence to face him head-on. Thus, he directly entered God's descent and increased his temporary stats to the maximum. Clang. It was the first direct confrontation. Soren blocked Orcus' attack with his dual swords, but his figure was pushed back more than 10 meters. The difference in strength is too great. Soren swallowed the blood in his mouth and tested the effect of Orcus' staff on him. He then stood still and stretched his body. Suddenly his figure split into two. Mimicry. Soren did not use the doppelganger ability because the death of the doppelganger would damage the original body. However, mimicry did not have this problem and could also interfere with the enemy's battle. In a confrontation of this level, normal spells were basically useless. Both Soren and Orcus had more than 1,000 HP. Their immunity to normal spells was too high, and most of the elemental damage was also limited. In this situation, the only thing that both sides could compete with was the most basic of skills. For example, Soren would not give Orcus a chance to cast spells, and Orcus was not afraid of most of Soren's spells. All along, Soren's endurance was extremely high, and he also had the divine domain of death. Orcus' staff could not trigger the death effect at all. This was Soren's biggest advantage. Clang clang clang. In this short confrontation, both sides had a better understanding of each other's strength. Soren was a classic example of high agility and high attack, while Orcus was a classic example of high strength and high damage. Both sides were at the extremes and neither had any obvious weaknesses. Boom boom boom. The first round of physical confrontation ended. In an instant, Orcus cast more than 10 spells. These were all instant cast spells. He was still trying to find out Soren's weakness. Shadow Leap. Was a pity? Soren wasn't afraid of spells. He was immune to spells from Circle 1 to Circle 4, and he had Divine Shield to protect himself from higher-level spells. He could also hide in the shadows. Similarly, Soren also gave his opponent the first round of instant cast spells. He used Melf's Strong Acid Arrow and Melf's Minute Meteor. Orcus howled in pain. It seemed like he was not immune to Soren's spells and had suffered some damage. However, his regenerative ability was very strong, and he also had the ability of a priest. He recovered in the blink of an eye. The battle seemed to have reached a stalemate. Both Soren and Orcus had the ability to hurt each other, but they weren't confident that they could kill each other in one hit. Soren could heal himself with divine spells. Similarly, Orcus could be restored using divine arts. The battle between the two sides determined that they had to suppress the other side, and it was obvious that this was not going to be easy. Outside the battlefield, the advantages of the city of Mordor began to show. Vivian and Lillian were mid-level gods together. Saruman was a demigod, Fallen, which was a high-grade legendary spellcaster. Alice controlled a huge golem army, and Gloria controlled the magic lock on the arcane tower. From time to time she could also use the superconducting mana crystal pulse. If it wasn't for maintaining the energy of the magic lock, a round of cannon fire would be enough. The battle was tilting towards the city of Mordor. Orcus had great power, but he didn't have any gods as his subordinates. The only one that could be regarded as a god was the Ghoul King Dorison, but now it seemed that he wasn't on the battlefield. In the battle, Orcus was obviously getting anxious. He tried to find Soren's weakness, and his attacks were getting fiercer and fiercer. On the other hand, Soren was gradually moving around and could even use simulacrum to hunt down nearby liches. Soren couldn't kill Orcus at once, but he could delay the opponent and gradually suppress the situation of the Abyss army. Undead Domain. Lord of the Undead. Mummy's Dust. Orcus finally couldn't help it. With the opening of a domain, he raised his hand and sprinkled out a gray dust. Then the figures of 6 ancient mummies began to gather in front of him, and at the same time, they rushed towards Soren from all directions. There's actually such a method. In one breath, he summoned 6 legendary helpers, which surprised Soren. But soon the light of the elemental stone appeared, and an elder wind elemental, an elder fire elemental, and a giant earth elemental poured out of the portal. He also knew a lot of summoning spells such as dryads, and more dryads. However, there was no need for dryads in this level of battle. They had many other uses. Bang! In just one confrontation, the giant earth elemental summoned by Soren was blown away, and then the elder fire elemental was torn apart by the 3 mummies. At this time, Soren realized that something was wrong, because the ancient mummies in front of him had the light of divinity on them. He was very surprised and said to himself, they actually summoned divine mummies. Looks like there's no other way. Soren put away his curved sword and suddenly stretched out his hand toward the void, and then said in a deep voice, "My servants, listen to my call." Gate of the Kingdom of God. A light gate opened in front of him. Since the opponent wanted to use summoned creatures to suppress him, he didn't mind showing the opponent a luxurious lineup of summoned servants. The Gate of the Kingdom of God opened. Accompanied by a golden radiance, an otherworldly god's emissary walked out. Then 4 otherworldly god servants with black wings flew out, followed by 12 high-level heroic spirits in the form of shadow angels. A group of servants in the form of shadow angels protected Soren in the middle. My lord. After the ugly monkey died, the angel from another world knelt on one knee toward Soren, then stood up and pulled out a sharp blade that glowed with dark light. Theoretically speaking, Soren's Gate of the Kingdom of God could summon any servant in the Kingdom of God, from gods to angels. As long as Soren had enough divine power, he could summon as many servants as he wanted. This was the key reason why gods were almost impossible to defeat outside of the Avatar crisis. Fighting against a true god was equivalent to fighting against the Kingdom of God. The revenge of the Queen of Spiders on the Arcanists had proved this point. Kill them. Soren nodded calmly. A true god could summon thousands of heroic spirits with a wave of his hand. He didn't have this ability now, but it was enough to summon an army of heroic spirits. Chapter 1053. The cold wind howled. After winter, the temperature in the outer islands also gradually dropped, but today the drop seemed to be very obvious. Gloria's silhouette stood at the top of the arcane tower. She was controlling the massive magic lock. However, as the snowflakes drifted away, Gloria seemed to have sensed something. She nodded lightly towards the distance. The battle below was still going on. Although the city of Mordor seemed to have a great advantage, there were too many enemies. Countless undead almost filled the field of vision. The defense line of the dwarven shield warriors was constantly being compressed, and the ratio of casualties was gradually increasing. Even if a large number of cannon fodder were consumed with golems, the number of undead army was still more than 5 times that of the city of Mordor. The middle-grade demons began to break through the defense line, and the drows pulled out their swords to join the battle. In the city of Mordor, only these drows with high-grade professions could deal with these demons one-on-one. The pressure on the priests became greater and greater. Some priests who had used up their divine spells began to join the battle with scepters. The priests in this world were not weak spellcasters. They could wear heavy armor and fight head-on with warhammers. On the other side of the battlefield, Orcus's situation seemed to be a little unfavorable. After his 3rd resurrection, he had not recovered his full strength. Neither the Lord of the Dead nor the God of Death, Nero, would allow him to fully recover. That would not allow them to control Orcus. Soren's suppression began to become obvious. Also, because of the existence of the magic lock, the combat power of the enemy spellcasters had decreased a lot. Many low-grade spells of the liches had lost their effect, and the preparation time for high-level spells was constant. The Dark Blade and the Inquisitor Assassin, who were given divinity by Soren, had been staring at them. The figure of the arcane assassin was like a ghost. Every time he appeared, an enemy would fall. The snow was getting heavier and heavier. Orcus's figure was already covered with scars. Soren was also injured, but he immediately recovered with a high recovery spell. Dorisen. Finally, the undead king, Orcus, lost all his patience. The more this battle continued, the more likely he was to lose because some of the demons had begun to collapse. They were afraid of the gods. And Mordor City seemed to have more than one god. Orcus smashed his huge scepter on the ground, and a huge summoning circle automatically formed. The figure of Dorisen, the king of ghouls, appeared along with some huge twisted ghouls. He summoned his servant, the leader of the undead army, the king of ghouls, Dorisen. You finally can't hold it in anymore? When the king of ghouls appeared, Soren quickly retreated. He didn't want to fight two powerful demon lords at once. Snowflakes danced in the air. Soren's figure turned into a golden shadow as he slowly said, "Then let's end this now." Whoosh! A gale swept through the entire battlefield in an instant. The snowstorm suddenly became incomparably fierce, and the ground froze into ice at a speed visible to the naked eye. Countless ice and snow fell like sharp blades, and the demons let out incomparably shrill screams, and the undead army fell to the ground in droves. Princess Royal's figure appeared. After Soren bought a lot of time for her, Princess Royal finally completed this super-large divine spell. Icebound Kingdom. The cold instantly shrouded the battlefield. The army of Mordor City quickly retreated, and a terrible snowstorm fell from the sky. The low-level undead were directly frozen into ice sculptures, and the high-level demons were covered with scars. Ice and snow gathered in the wind. Then a little golden light fell, and a 20-meter-tall snow giant appeared in the snow and ice. It roared and rampaged through the undead army. All attacks could hardly leave a mark on its body because the ice and snow quickly repaired it. Sure enough. Soren looked at the countless fallen undead and murmured, "The large-scale lethality of spellcasters after ascending to godhood is still greater than that of melee fighters." Princess Royal almost reversed the situation of the battle by herself. This kind of scene could only be achieved by Gloria using meteorite, but that meant that the island of Mordor would be severely damaged. Soren was still not comparable to Princess Royal in terms of AoE damage. He could use area divine power shockwaves and legendary spells, but there was no way to kill tens of thousands of demons and undead as quietly as Princess Royal. Master. In the snowstorm, a girl with a nine-tailed whip appeared. She stopped a group of high-level demons and some petitioners appeared behind her. The girl of pain bowed slightly to Soren to show her respect, and then quickly joined the battle. Soren just frowned slightly at this. As Soren's subordinate god, under normal circumstances, the girl of pain should have joined the battle as soon as possible. But in fact, the situation was that when Princess Royal appeared, and the battle was almost completely in Mordor's favor, the girl of pain summoned her heroic spirit. Sure enough, Soren said to himself, the native god who surrendered is not trustworthy. Soren was a little disappointed with the girl of pain. The undead's attack stopped. The army of Mordor City launched a counterattack, and Soren, Princess Royal, and Vivian surrounded Orcus's Dorisen. The situation was very clear. Orcus, the undead king, and Dorisen, the ghoul king, would face Soren, intermediate divine power, the twins of fear, Vivian and Lillian, intermediate divine power, and Arendelle's snow goddess, Princess Royal, intermediate divine power. A trace of fear finally appeared on Orcus's face. On the other hand, Dorisen, the ghoul king, was very confused. He thought that his master was going to attack the material plane to plunder and kill, but he didn't expect that his master was going to attack Mordor City. Dorisen, who had just responded to the summon, didn't see the situation clearly, and then he found himself surrounded by 3 intermediate divine powers. His mood was simply **cat up. Roar. Orcus let out a roar full of unwillingness. He waved the Orcus staff and rushed towards Soren. However, what everyone didn't expect was that when Orcus rushed up crazily, Dorisen, the ghoul king, quietly retreated, then suddenly opened a strange door of light and disappeared directly in front of everyone's eyes. He escaped. The surrounding space had been sealed, but he still escaped. Crafty field? Soren seemed to have thought of something, and then he faced Orcus in front of him. Orcus had no chance of winning. When Dorisen, the ghoul king, escaped, the less than 30% chance of winning was directly reduced to 0. Unless some kind of miracle happened, it was impossible for Orcus to defeat 3 intermediate divine powers at the same time. He was dead for sure. He just didn't know if he could be resurrected after this death. Maybe. Dying in the hands of Soren would be his final end. Chapter 1054. The battle was still going on. However, when the king of ghouls ran away, the only thing left was to kill the Abyss army. Orcus was very powerful, but even the most powerful two-headed baboon, Demogorgon, couldn't fight against 3 mid-level gods at the same time. Therefore, Orcus' injuries became more and more serious. Princess Royal's frost domain greatly reduced Orcus' speed and reflexes, and Vivian and Lillian's harassment constantly attacked his recovery ability. Soren, as the main damage output of the battle, was wandering around. Under the siege of 2 god-tier spellcasters and a god-tier thief, even if Orcus was once one of the 3 giants of the Abyss, he could only hold on for about 10 minutes before his heart was pierced by Soren's silver light. Roar! A roar full of unwillingness sounded. Orcus' remaining vitality dissipated with Soren's last blow, and then a lot of divine light scattered on the battlefield. However, in the haze, an invisible shadow emerged, and then it broke away from Orcus' body and immediately wanted to drill into the ground. It was automatically returning to the bottomless abyss. A little bit of divine light scattered on the battlefield, and the one who gained the most was naturally Soren, followed by Vivian and Lillian, and then the fallen witch who didn't participate in the battle came in third. On the contrary, Princess Royal, who was the main force of the battle, only absorbed a little divine value, and then Gloria also only got a little. The golden light spots were divided into more than 20 parts and scattered on the battlefield. Some merged into the bodies of the high-grade demons that escaped, and some fell into the bodies of the professions in the city of Motor. The giants who had half of the swamp giant bloodline gained a little divine value. Where do you think you're going? Soren saw the shadow that escaped, but strangely Vivian and Princess Royal didn't notice it. It seemed that only those who mastered the power of death could see Orcus' soul, and when Soren opened his death domain to trap the soul in front of him, he immediately felt a strong struggle. This was a very unique soul. He was protected by the chaotic energy of the bottomless abyss. Orcus' physical body was just a shell. The soul in front of him was everything. As long as this soul was not destroyed, Orcus could still be summoned back to life. Bang! The Orcus staff fell to the ground. As Soren trapped the soul in front of him, he was surprised that Orcus' soul had the power to resist the power of the death priesthood. Looks like the legend says that Orcus is the first undead in this world. Maybe it's true. It was a very strange point. Soren was unable to suppress this soul. Faced with Soren's approach, Orcus' soul gritted its teeth and broke through Soren's defense. Then it escaped into the Orcus staff. The radiance of divinity shone. Then a faint light appeared on the Orcus staff, and Orcus' soul completely hid inside the divine artifact. Do you think I can't do anything to you just because you're hiding in a divine artifact? Soren waved his hand and the Orcus staff fell into his hand. This +5 divine artifact was very famous. However, Orcus' resurrection seemed to have something to do with this divine artifact. This was the 3rd time Orcus had been resurrected. It was impossible for him to come back to life every time. Soren believed that the reason for Orcus' continuous resurrection must be because of this divine artifact. I can't suppress it? Soren tried to use his divine power to invade the divine artifact, but it was like mud sinking into the sea. He frowned and looked at the Orcus staff in front of him. He muttered, "This thing is actually so heavy? Something's wrong. Could it be a divine artifact made from annihilation? There's no point in hiding in there. I have ways to deal with you slowly." The weight of the Orcus staff was terrifying. According to Soren's estimation, the staff's actual weight should be more than a ton. However, it was enchanted with spells. It seemed that anyone who was given the right to use it could also use it. However, its actual weight was more than a ton. It was estimated that only Orcus, who was the strongest in the abyss, could use it easily. It was no wonder that Soren vomited blood when he first fought with him. A row of data appeared in front of him. You've killed Abyss Giant, Undead King, Orcus. Extracting target's soul energy. Target's soul energy has dissipated. Extracting part of the soul. You've received 325,000 slaughter EXP. Target has divinity. Extracting target's divinity. You've received 85 divinity. Target has divinity. Extracting target's divinity. You've received 10 divinity. Extracting death domain. Compatibility 100%. Your death domain has been upgraded. Extracting evil domain. Compatibility 72%. Your evil domain has been upgraded. Your death's hand ability has been upgraded. A large amount of golden divine radiance merged into Soren's body. However, it was a little regrettable that although Soren had received nearly 100 divinity, the number of divinity he received was still very little. This was a common problem in the abyss. There were many creatures with divinity but very few with divinity. This was the same even for the 3 giants of the abyss. Although Orcus was extremely powerful, he still had a lot of divinity. The number of divinity he had was pitifully small. Moreover, every time Orcus was resurrected, he would kill and devour other powerful demons and undead to recover his strength. However, it was destined that he would not be able to accumulate much divinity. In fact, Soren had obtained enough divinity because this time it was Nero, the god of death, who secretly controlled the resurrection of Orcus. That was why there were so many divinity points. Otherwise, Soren's divinity might only be in the single digits. Looking at the entire abyss, among all the demon lords who could provide a little bit of divinity, perhaps only the succubus queen who controlled the taboo, lust, ethics, and other divinity could provide a little bit more divinity. Then, the ghoul king who just escaped should have a divinity that was close to a lesser divine power. Lastly, the gnoll king should have a divinity that was close to a lesser divine power. In the abyss, it was easy to find a high-level demon with divinity, but it was difficult to find one with divinity. After all, divinity was mostly innate while divinity was mostly condensed. This determined that the difficulty of obtaining divinity was much higher than divinity. The Staff of Orcus. The soul of the abyss giant once escaped into this divine artifact. Soren tried to suppress it, but there was no reaction at all. This divine artifact seemed to be a little special because it had the power of death, and it seemed to have gathered a trace of the divinity of death in it. Unbelievable. This divine artifact seemed to be even more awesome than Orcus himself. Chapter 1055. The strong smell of blood filled the battlefield. In this battle, although the Abyss army was completely wiped out and suffered heavy losses, the disaster that Mordor City suffered was also not small. 3 towns were razed to the ground by the crazy demons, and more than 30,000 civilians were directly killed or injured in the hands of the demons and the undead. In contrast, the loss of the army was a little less because the Golem army took a considerable part of the loss. All the soldiers could not help but cheer when they defeated the powerful demon army, but soon the cheers gradually subsided because Mordor City had never suffered such a big loss, especially when so many innocent civilians died in the hands of the enemy. With the Abyss army as the center, less than 600 people in the 3 nearby towns managed to escape, and the rest were all ruthlessly killed by the undead. The casualties diluted the joy of victory, and Soren's heart was full of anger. Mordor City had never suffered such a big loss. More than 30,000 civilians were killed by the demon army. Whether it was the strength of Mordor City or Soren's church, both suffered a big blow. No matter who is behind this, he must pay the price. Soren looked into the distance. The priests still began to dispel the plague and disease. The undead brought the smell of plague and the corrosive smell of the corpse. These lands must be purified, and a large number of civilians who died in vain needed to be buried. More than 5,000 soldiers died in the battle and almost everyone was injured. If there was no support from the church behind them, perhaps more than 60% of the army of Mordor City would have died. Orcus, who ordered you to attack Mordor City? A trace of killing intent appeared in Soren's eyes. The Abyss army would not attack Mordor City for no reason. There were so many places in the material plane that could be attacked. Why would they choose Mordor City, which was the most difficult to attack? There must be someone behind this who wanted to weaken Soren's strength. Clean up the battlefield. Soren nodded to the high priest behind him, and then the next moment he appeared in the temple. The power in the temple had been consumed a lot, and a large prayer ceremony was needed to restore it. Soren held the legendary Orcus staff in his hand and waved it a little, but he felt that it was not smooth. The weight of this staff was a little too high. Even Soren felt a little uncomfortable using it. It would be much easier for the demon incarnation to use it. About 1.5 tons. Soren estimated the weight of the Orcus staff in his hand. He then examined it with his consciousness and muttered, "There's a special spell inside. If someone with Orcus permission uses it, the weight will be reduced to around 100 pounds. The heavier the weapon, the better." Needless to say, the daggers used by assassins were light and small. Thin swords were generally controlled to be less than 3 caddies in weight. Long swords would be slightly heavier, but rarely would they exceed 10 caddies. The giants, who could easily use weapons that weighed more than half a ton, were an exception. Under normal circumstances, only the demons of the bottomless abyss would use such weapons. According to a relatively simple calculation formula, a human with around 10 points of strength could bear a weight of 100 pounds under heavy load, which equated to 359 kilograms. That was close to 100 kilograms. Many people who had tried to resist Rice should have a clear idea of this. Among the extraordinary creatures whose strength was above 30, the easiest target was the young red dragon. Its large size gave it about 32 strength, and it could bear 9,600 pounds under heavy load, which was 354 tons in common units. Under normal circumstances, the amount of strength one could display had a lot to do with the weight they were carrying. Usually they could lift up to twice their maximum weight off the ground. They could also push or drag up to 5 times their maximum weight. Under better conditions, the weight could even be doubled. For example, an adult red dragon could lift up to 7 tons easy, maximum 4 tons, very hard, and push or drag up to 75 tons easy, maximum 5 tons, very hard. Strictly speaking, Soren still couldn't use the Orcus staff in battle. He could easily lift it up and swing it around, but it was completely different in battle. There was a price to pay for using a heavy weapon. Even if Soren's demon incarnation had close to 40 strength, the giant executioner's sword only weighed about half a ton. Under normal circumstances, the Baler weighed 4,500 pounds, had 35 strength and was about 5 meters tall. However, the giant executioner's sword only weighed about 400 pounds. The Baler could easily lift up to 10 tons of weight, but it didn't mean that they couldn't use heavy weapons. However, doing so would reduce their combat strength. Maybe I can try to make it into an executioner's sword. Soren held the Orcus staff in his hand, and he already had some ideas in his mind. Orcus's strength was the strongest in the entire abyss. Soren wasn't too sure about its limits, but even if Soren activated his divine blessing, he still felt a lot of pressure when facing Orcus. He didn't dare to fight this monster directly. The strength of his demon incarnation was 40 strength, and Soren hadn't tested it before. But according to his own estimation as the Baler's demon incarnation, it shouldn't be too difficult to use this weapon. At least it wouldn't reduce his combat strength. This is a divine artifact. Soren stared at the Orcus staff in his hand and murmured, "How do I remake it?" A +5 divine artifact. This wasn't an easy task. Everyone knew that destroying a divine artifact would result in a severe backlash, and even Mage's Disjunction only had a 1% chance of destroying a divine artifact. Soren felt that the Orcus staff was different when he first came into contact with it. It was like a phylactery, and Orcus's soul relied on it to continuously resurrect. This undoubtedly made it more difficult to destroy it. Soren didn't just need to destroy the Orcus staff. He needed to extract the death energy within it, then completely destroy Orcus's soul, and finally remake it into a giant executioner's sword. This wasn't going to be easy. Soren hadn't modified such a high-level divine artifact, and it seemed that it wouldn't work if he just used his divine power. This divine artifact had been given divinity by Orcus, and the enemies it killed could be directly turned into undead. Soren wanted to preserve this power. If the two-handed sword of his demon incarnation could directly kill the target and resurrect them into undead puppets, then the effect of the battle would be very terrifying. What should I do? Soren couldn't help but fall into deep thought. P.S. It seems that the weight of the Orcus staff has caused a controversy. People think that this weight is completely unworthy of its status as a demon lord. It's so much worse than those who can blow up planets with one punch. Pure physical strength could be roughly calculated. Fu-Tu never knew how to write and couldn't write the kind of words that could destroy the world and blow up planets with one punch. The gods had the ability to destroy continents, and the Arcane Empire also had alchemy devices that could destroy continents. But some powers were like flipping a table. Once they were used, everyone was done for. Orcus's strength was the limit, and only the Centimanes could be stronger. Without taking into account the divine power of magic, the limit that the body could reach was only so much. As for the specific amount of lethality that could be broken out, only high-end data people could calculate it. However, Fu-Tu had not carefully calculated the specific conversion. If you want to be entangled, you can estimate it yourself. According to an ordinary person, a boxer. How many pounds did he carry, how many pounds did he lift, and how many pounds did he use in the final battle? Not counting his supernatural abilities. You can go and convert according to the ratio. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.